Chris Miles, welcome to Tech Talk with Daniel Albu.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to dive into your incredible work in animation and game art today. It was quite a fun challenge sorting through all the talented Chris Mileses in the industry. A few of their credits even got mixed in with yours on some websites. But
yeah.
but I've got it all sorted out now. And if I had to choose, I'd say you're definitely the best of the bunch.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So let's start from the beginning. How did you get into art?
Let's see. I'm Canadian. Originally, I'm a dual citizen now. I'm living in the United States. So my interest was always to basically do some form of art for a living. But this was back in the 1980s. And originally, I went to school for graphic design. And this was at York University in Toronto. And I was there for 4 years for a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. And with a major in graphic design, minors in like art history, some humanities and such alike. This was in the early to late 80s when I discovered, much to my chagrin, that a lot of the skills that I'd learned became obsolete while I was in school. And like we were hand making type and setting, cutting and pasting it and setting it up for photostat work and such alike. And then desktop publishing kind of just blew it all away. And honestly, I can objectively say I was a really crappy graphic designer. I just couldn't get it. Typography is very abstract. And I wanted to draw, I wanted to draw from life or draw from imagination. So it was kind of like never concede, don't settle, do what you want. Don't say, well, that's the closest thing I can get to art, so I'll do that. And no offense to those people who can actually do typography and understand the music of type. Or are happy with doing things like kerning or manipulation of letters. But like I said, it's just too abstract. I bummed around for a while doing some graphic arts jobs and then not graphic arts jobs. But I think a thing of note was I ended up managing a video store. Many of you may not know what that is. But it was a stores. That was back in the days when we watched media on videotape and later on DVDs. But I was still had in the back of my head, right, do I really want to do this? Or I really want to do art for a living? And then I just someone dropped me a line on the Sheridan College animation program. And this was in Oakville, Ontario. And I rolled in with my portfolio that I had from York University. So I didn't have to do, it's a 3-year program, but 4 years for people coming straight out of high school because they wanted you to take like an art fundamentals course in the first year. But they said, oh, okay, we're not going to put you through fundamentals again, because I had to do that at York as well, so I went straight into the animation program. Now, this was a traditional animation program, classical animation, pencil and paper, and film, and that was a 3-year course, and that was probably the most fulfilling, as far as education experience. It was the most fulfilling thing I've ever done. As far as an educational experience, it was, I loved the program. I loved the people. And it was also, I can honestly say, the toughest thing I've ever done. Up to that point, it was a very demanding program. I do not know. I cannot speak to what it is like now. I haven't visited it in Sheridan in a long time. But back then, it was all about attrition. Very demanding, very high standards. We had 125 people in our first year class, 70 in our second year class. And for third year, we had 35 graduates, if I recall correctly. If I'm off, it may be by one or two. So just think, start with 125, end with 35. You really felt a sense of accomplishment coming out of that. And the timing was perfect. Graduating in 1994 was right at the cusp of the animation boom that was occurring. And we had tons of studios showing up to recruit. And mostly American, some Canadian. And it wasn't just for feature animation. It was pretty much for everything. That's why, that was the real nature of the boom back then. And there was game studios, film studios, television studios, commercial studios, such like. They were all looking for animators. I think what fueled the boom mostly was the Disney films that were extremely popular and very lucrative at the time. And there was a number of studios that, like Fox, I remember they recruited Warner Brothers that were looking to do feature animation. But then the games industry was also booming. There was a tech curve on that where they were finding that now that more refined and advanced animation was possible, then they were looking for people with the skill sets to do it. I guess they got tired of programmer art at some point, so there was, it was very different from my graduation experience from York, because there was such a huge demand for animators back then. Actually, I think it was 37 people who graduated that year, not 35. I think 35 people had jobs within 3 weeks of graduating.
Wow.
And there were a few that already, and I believe the two that didn't were just taking time off. They just wanted a break. And but eventually the entire class was employed. I stayed in touch with the school that year. I know, and what I was told, this is, again, I wasn't witness to this, but there was actually more recruiters the following year than for our year. So the boom was full tilt by 96 in terms of looking for people.
So in 1994, you contributed as a layout artist for 13 episodes on Rupert.
Yes.
Was this your first big job in the industry?
Yes. Right after graduating, I received at least 3 job offers, and I took the one. The one I took was for a studio in Ottawa, a small studio called Funbag Animation, a name that would never fly today. But but hey, I didn't make the studio name. This was 3 Canadian animation veterans who got together, and they just founded this studio. Gord, Rick. I'm sorry, it was a long time ago. I can't remember their last names, but Funback doesn't exist anymore, I don't believe, or in that name. And I think Rick is the only original owner left over last time I checked. But they worked in television animation, and what I wanted to do was basically get my feet wet and get a taste of the industry. And Funbag they focused on layout, but they also did storyboarding and occasionally animation as well. I had no plans to leave Canada as well, so I worked there. And as far as my experience on Rupert, I appreciated, the first thing I learned was there's school speed and there's production speed. I remember bitterly complaining along with my fellow students, but I only speak for myself, about how long it was taking to do my layout homework. And Brian LeMay, who was our layout instructor at Sheridan, would give us homework, and they were like, oh, it's giving me just a week to do this layout. And and it just seemed like I want to learn how to animate. I want to, have characters moving. I don't know why do I have to spend so much time doing layout? So working there, you learn the tricks. And when you're focused on doing one thing as opposed to doing multiple tasks, I mean, at Sheridan, you learn life drawing, layout, visual language, animation, more animation, so on and so forth. But focusing on layout and design, making props, making locations, characters, and such like what was the saying they used to say there? It was first get good, then get fast. And I got very fast. We all did, and suddenly I'm knocking out like 1 or 2 layouts a day, as opposed to, I'm not complaining about, oh, I've only got a week to do this. It was like, whatever. It's different when you're focused, and it's different when you're learning. Every studio has their processes, and a good studio comes up with processes that are designed to be efficient and to make your work easier. And so you get faster. But once again, they give you the time to say, all right, first get good, and then get fast. And
what does a layout artist even do?
You're basically designing the spaces in which the scenes occur. And I can say what I did. And so what I did a lot of the time was I would design the space. I'd do a location design, or I'd be working from a location design, saying like, here's the space, say it's a street or inside a room or whatever. And you have the background elements, and then you have the props. The props are any objects that are not characters that may need to animate. And then there's the character design. So working with all of those, you set up the camera. Usually you're also working from a storyboard. The storyboard has already established what the camera angle will be, and also establishes the position of the characters. This is the blueprint for the scene. I know in live action for live action that there are directors who use layouts, or who used layouts back then. Nowadays, it's gotten a lot more sophisticated. I'm not informed. I've not, stuff like Previs, for example. But back then, because animation is expensive and time consuming, and you're literally making film, right? Then planning is very important. The layout basically plans out the scene. Or it's a more detailed version of what the scene is going to be. You work from a smart, tiny little storyboard, then you take that, and then you make a larger version of it, which also captures any camera moves. If it's a pan, which is basically, the camera moves from position here, X to Y, and then sometimes you'd have a layout that's like 4 or 5 sheets long, because you're doing a tracking shot following a character running across the screen. Well, what's going on behind the character? What's going on in the environment while they're running, or while any kind of movement is occurring? All of that planning is in layout, any kind of spatial moves or whatnot. Or it could just be something really simple, like a 2-shot, 2 shots waist up, 2 characters are talking to each other. Well, what's the space look like? And what is the composition of the scene? Is the camera behind one character and you're looking over their shoulder while you're talking to another one? That planning, the thumbnail planning occurs in the storyboards, and then the layout is when you expand it more and add more detail. As part of the production process, this goes on to the background painter. So the background painter and the animators are, the next step into production when they're actually making it closer to final. the background painter knows exactly what needs to be painted based on the layout. The animator knows the position of the characters in the scene. That gets a little bit more convoluted, though, on the animation end, because there's a lot of dependencies there, i.e., dialogue, sound recording, and such like. And but it's part of the planning process, and an important part of the planning process, the layout. The layout also enables you to do things like, actually, you can do that in the storyboard phase too. Sorry, I'm jumping around here. When we call it a Leica reel, I'm not sure. I guess it would be the equivalent of a previs test. You can literally shoot your layouts and time out your production, right? If you have dialogue, a dialogue track, and you can basically have an idea of what every shot is going to look like in sequence and how each shot leads into the next one. Just to make sure visually that it works.
So kind of a low-tech previs.
Yes. Previs is like, all right, we're in, whatever 3D program you're using. And there are advantages to previs, like, I don't like the way that camera looks. Just move it over here and such alike. But we can get into that afterwards when we talk about transition from 2D to 3D and why, the advantages of both, because I discovered that as well, or I have opinions on that.
So the following year, you worked as a storyboard artist on one episode of the Mask TV series.
Yeah.
Now the show itself had, as much like the Mask movie, it was very fast-paced and had a very cartoonish style. So how did you approach storyboarding for such a visually intense show?
It was my first major storyboard assignment. I worked with Rick, who was one of the 3 directors in the studio, and he advised me on how to approach it. Just the experience of storyboarding itself is very lonely. The advice I was given was, don't do it in the studio, do it at home. And I remember Don, one of the other senior guys there, said, like, I'd go out in a log cabin and I'd do my storyboarding, and then I'd start to go a little crazy and go outside and talk to squirrels. And so the process was, I'd do it at home, and then at the end of every week, I'd come in and go over the boards with him, with Rick, and the approach to it was basically, okay, we've got to capture that sort of mad, frenetic vibe from the Mask, from the film and the comic. I was given issues of the comic for reference as well, the comic book, and those were really helpful. I had the character designs and the props and all of that, most of it done. I actually ended up making up a fair bit of stuff. The actual design pack, I remember, wasn't complete, so I had to make it up. My approach initially was to be as careful and as detailed as possible. So I was basically making literally miniature illustrations, and it was apparent that I was going to burn out. And if I did it that way, the other issue was, number one, deadlines were very, very important for television animation back then. So one thing I did learn was, like, don't carefully sculpt every single figure. You have to learn how to commit. And what that means is drawing confidently. Just draw your lines quickly. Quick, commit. You can still draw cleanly, and the boards can be recognizable. But the other thing is, after the first revision process we went through, I realized that all the time that I'd spent carefully sculpting everything was wasted. Work rough, work quickly, and then clean up afterwards. So that if you run out of time, at least your roughs, which are readable, are there. Right? And by rough, I mean like, just quick blue pencil roughs. And the sequence is more important than the individual image most of the time. How one scene leads into the other, especially if you want to capture a show with a lot of action, where there's a lot of movement, like, and in all dimensions as well. I mean, that's one thing. I recall him dropping off of he was fighting his main antagonist on a construction site and dropping girders on him. And, it's basically, I set up a shot where you'd follow the action of the girders as they came down and slammed, and then Mask would land nearby, and then the guy would emerge from it, all sinister and scary, throwing the girders off. This was like a big unstoppable thug that looked vaguely like Frankenstein. And then the Mask would do a reaction. And all of the reactions were sort of like, designed to be like over the top. I'd always been a fan of Tex Avery, and I know that was a source for a lot of the Mask's takes, was the old Tex Avery style cartoons from Warner Brothers days. The eyes popping out of the head, the teeth popping out, the tongue extending, that kind of thing. And so it was challenging as my first assignment, but learning how to draw quickly and efficiently was important. You couldn't mess around with overseas deadlines back then. I don't know if I haven't worked in television animation in a long time, but back then it was like the storyboards had to be done so that the layouts could be done next, and that package of designs, layouts, storyboards, everything would be shipped overseas for production, for animation production. And those studios, they schedule their productions like months ahead of time. And this was before the digital age, which meant they had to be physically shipped, the actual paper artwork, right? And basically there was if you didn't get it to them on time or ahead of time, then they'd have a bunch of artists sitting around with nothing to do, right? Or beginning work, and there's a penalty. There's actually a financial cost to it. So like that was always emphasized, that, like, hey, don't mess up your deadlines. We need to get this amount of work done by this time, which explained there's a reason why television animation looks the way it does a lot of the time, right? It's sort of like, hey,
with the looped backgrounds and the reused animations. Yep.
Yeah. A lot of it has to do with because it's too fast. Oh my God, it's the construction site.
Yeah. Exactly.
There he is. The guy that looks like Frankenstein. Yeah, that.
Whoa, hey, Pally. Insurance rules prohibit civilians from entering the actual work area.
So yeah, you got the scaffolding. So how long did it take you to create this sequence?
I don't recall. I do recall that after I was done, Rick told me, why are you doing the layout artist's work? You don't have to be this detailed. Yeah, I do remember there was a lot of vertical work in there.
And how long did it take to produce one episode from start to finish?
I'm going to say, I'm thinking it took me about a month, 3 weeks to a month to do the storyboards for one episode.
Okay.
Okay, maybe I misremember the girders coming down on him, but I do remember the girders. Like I said, this was like 20 years ago. No, what am I saying? This was 1994.
This was 30 years ago.
30 years ago, yeah. But because you only have, I didn't have an oversight of the entire production. I only had my task, which was the storyboards. And I know I didn't do those boards for the entire episode in 1 week. I'm pretty sure it was about 3 weeks, maybe a month, that I did the storyboards for. So in response to your query of how long it took to do a single episode, I can't recall. But I'd say also, how can I describe it? Television production for episodes, it was all broken into pieces. So you'd be working on multiple episodes at once. A lot of the time, I know for the shows I worked on, like Mighty Max and Rupert, there'd be a crew of us working on layouts for like, okay, or The Critic, or there's another show, you're working on this section for this episode, and the layout assignments were divided by scene, right? So which was at that time, if I recall, defined by location or lack of location. The easy money scenes were the 2 shots with no background, right? Or 2 shot with a blur background, or or a close up on a face. The easiest shots were the ones where you didn't have to show the entire body of the character.
So that's why you worked only on one episode, because all of the episodes were being worked on in parallel. So you just got one.
Yeah, it's not worked on in sequence. I was one storyboard artist working on one episode, and there were other storyboard artists working at the same time as me on other episodes, or within the same time frame, to get the show done.
And how do you handle things like continuity, given the fact that all of these different people are working on something that's supposed to have the same, visual language and the same cinematography of sorts?
That is one of the reasons why you do your part of your planning process is, as I said, character design, props, and location design. Those are done ahead of time. You kind of have to do that because to capture the style of the characters, the style of the locations, the style of the objects, and those I had access to, and that was my reference. That way, it's not that big a deal in storyboards, but ideally you should try to stay on model as much as possible. That just means, hey, I can't help but noticing you have 3 different storyboard artists, and the character, the mask looks completely different from each version. That shouldn't happen. We should all be referencing the same model sheets. Depending on the nature of the production, they can be really strict too. Your work can be rejected. I didn't work on The Simpsons, but The Simpsons was done at, I don't think I did. No, I didn't. I didn't. I wasn't there when we were. Yeah, I wasn't there when we were doing Simpsons stuff, but The Simpsons work was being done at Funbag at the time. Not storyboards, but layouts. And the guys who did work on it used to tell me how strict Film Roman was with regard to model sheets. And I'd seen the actual model sheet directory that they had, and it was literally like a telephone book. And this was back in the 90s, right? I don't imagine what it's like now, but plenty of reference. And you had to stay on model. They were about the strictest. The shows that I worked on, The Critic was the closest one to being that strict. That was Film Roman again, too. But for the vast majority of the time, it was like, all right, here's a rotation of a character from a model sheet. You always got that. But if you were lucky, you'd get like an action model sheet, too, showing the character posed in the different poses. You got details of all the props. And again, details of the locations. But beyond that, in terms of the actual animation style, because it was segmented, I didn't have like a director of animation to consult to figure out, okay, I'm going to be moving the camera around a fair bit here, but I just want to know if this works for you as far as I was planning out your animation. Generally speaking, that's also a testament to, well, if you do everything internally in one location in one studio, then you get much better communication between people, and that way the storyboard artist can talk to actually speak to the director of animation. I never did, right? I was like, all right, Rick. It was just basically me and the director of what was effectively a storyboard director, uh, uh, doing that math stuff for television, and that was it. It was myself and Rick talking.
So when did you start working at LucasArts then?
A moment of weakness. My friend Kevin Boyle, who graduated with me, gave me a call in February and asked me if I was interested in applying for a job as an animator at LucasArts. I don't know if you're familiar with Ottawa at all. Ottawa is the capital of Canada, and it's the second coldest capital in the world after Moscow. And so coldest capital, not city. And or that's what I was told back then, and I believed it. And while I recall very clearly, Kevin called me on a weekend, and I was staring out the window at foot-long icicles hanging from the awning of the porch, and I'm staring out the window, and it was cold and it was snowing. It's a lovely city. The 4 months of the year where it isn't cold. 4 or 5 months. Summers in Ottawa were wonderful. I loved going to visit the Rideau Canal, the market, and whatnot. Very clean city, as capitals often are. It's clean, like super clean. But he was asking me to come visit California, right? So I said, I don't know if I want to work in the States, but hell yeah, I'll apply and visit, sure. So I didn't make a huge secret out of it. I liked how honest Funbag was. When they approached me initially, they just said, we know this will be your first job, so how long can we count on you for? And I said, I want to work at a studio for at least a year, to get my feet wet. And they said, okay, that's reasonable. And there are other studios in Ottawa. There was Lacewood was the other studio in Ottawa, and they were they hired quite a few people at that place as well. They were pretty aggressive about their hiring as well. I'm just giving you background in terms of where animation was going on in the 90s in Canada. Wasn't that familiar with the stuff going on in the West Coast? The big studio in Toronto was Nelvana, and also Jeepers. I'm trying to remember the name of the studio, the Fern Gully studio. They did Fern Gully. I can't remember. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Anyhow, I flew down to California, Northern California. This was San Rafael. This was back when LucasArts was. This is before the Lucas Valley move, and I interviewed, and we went to the beach, and all right, things got weird when I went down because I had another friend working at Broderbund, and so she asked me if I could apply there as well. So I applied at Lucas. I said, all right, they're paying for my ticket to come down here. And also I stayed at my friend Kevin's place. So they didn't have to pay for, accommodations or whatever. And, but what ended up happening was I said, all right, I'm not doing anything with you until after I've spoken with LucasArts, we interviewed. That would be rude, And she said, sure, but you were planning on spending some time down here anyway. Yeah, okay, well, drop by. So that's how I ended up doing 2 interviews in one trip. And I love the work they were doing at Lucas. I love the work they were doing at Broderbund. It was sort of 6 of one, half dozen of the other, but I had a feeling. I don't know what it was. I just had a feeling that I would probably be a better fit at LucasArts. Who can say? I never ended up going there. Broderbund was doing living books, which were some beautiful work, animated versions of books. that they were selling, I believe, on CD-ROM, and children's books mostly. So it was the Bornstein Bears, I think, was one of the things they were doing. But Lucas, they were doing The Dig, and they'd shown me material from Full Throttle, and that was more my jam at the time. So I ended up accepting the offer. Then there was all the paperwork, the TN visa and such like. That took time to get done. I gave my notice at Funbag. We parted amicably. There was no hard feelings or whatever, and I moved to California, and I've been here ever since. This, I guess, was in 95 or 94, 95, around thereabouts.
Still on George Lucas's dime.
Yeah. Well, sort of. They give you they gave you a portion of cash for relocation expenses, and I mean, I'd been 1 year out of school. I didn't have that much to relocate, really. I traveled light, and because I'd been living like a rat for so long, being a student at Sheridan, and so wasn't that much. But we did. I do recall, hey, we had to talk with them about that. Sort of like what was considered fair for relocation expenses. They were new at this too. I mean, the whole. I think I was like the second or third round, or the second or third year that they'd been recruiting internationally. And I know that Graham was already there. Like Graham Annable, for example, was already there. And Jerry Bertolo, he was already there. I'm trying to remember who else. People that Mike Slisco was another guy. There were people that they'd recruited from Canada. And Kevin was already there. Kevin was already there, and he was the one who recommended me. But then then it was off to work on The Dig. My first experience in computer games.
So what was your first day at LucasArts like? They just put you in front of a computer and told you start working on The Dig?
No, it was mostly just familiarizing myself with the tools. For one, the work that I was doing was cutscene animation. So actually, they just stuck me on an animation disc and started drawing on paper, right? I do not recall ever doing in-game animation for The Dig, and which meant that I wasn't doing pixel work, like the actual, like using a mouse to create the pixels and do pixel art for the character with Scum style. Oh, are you familiar with that? I imagine you're familiar with that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. With Scum style animation. This was the nature of adventure games is, and and as it was explained to me, was that the reward moments for the player are the cutscenes. You complete the puzzle, you get the cutscenes, which is why there's a much greater premium placed on cutscenes in adventure games than for any other than for your typical game. So we want to spend time making sure the cutscenes are tight and well done. So they're not done using a Scum engine. The process was very, very different. We animate on paper and test it. We scan it and test it, and it's which was wonderful, as far as I was concerned. The old method, or the methods we'd learned at Sheridan, is like, okay, you do your animation, then you take it off to the camera room, and then you shoot it, and then you got to wait for the reel, for them to develop your film, and which was expensive, and then on 16 millimeter, and then you got to watch it, and so you do a Leica reel first, and it was at the time it seemed okay, this is how long it takes, but it was a time-consuming process. Whereas with me, it was just kind of like, all right, I've got my keys and breakdowns done, and then I'd take it off, scan it all, set it up, and play it back on screen. Digitizing stuff really accelerated the process. Let me put it that way. And so yeah, I remember the scene I had was really fun. It was one of the characters had to cut his own hand off, and
Right. Yeah.
and then slam this little alien nodule on the stump.
You did that?
Yeah, that was mine.
Wow, that's an amazing scene.
Thanks. And
that's like the best scene in the game.
Oh, well, thanks. I remember working at it, and I can't remember who it was. I had one of the other animators mime it for me, and I'd direct him. And the challenge was not to blow the rating of the game. So you never actually saw the hand being sawed off. But when he pulled, I had it with his back to the camera. And that way, there was like, I can't remember if I got the spray of blood in or not, but, yanks it off camera and then slams the nodule on his wrist. So I focused a lot of it on, well, there's the principles of animation that I'd learned, which is anticipation, action, and recovery. Focus on the anticipation and the recovery. Most actions are really fast and boring, right? Or too hard to follow. So it was sort of like him breathing hard, and then his response to having his hand cut off, to having someone sawing at his hand, and then the action is the pull, and then the recovery is him sticking the node on his stump, and then breathing heavily afterwards. And it was a lot of fun. Gruesome, but it was a lot of fun. That was the one I remembered. There may have been others that I did, but that one was the one I remembered the most. But
because that one's iconic.
Oh, thanks. It was fun to do. To say.
Yeah, also, and it was kids to adults. The rating I remember because I have the big box. It was kids to adults, but it mentioned the fact that there's animated violence.
Yeah, I couldn't actually have the camera in on his wrist from where his hand was stuck. But the other thing I found as well was the work-to-life balance was way better at LucasArts. I should describe that. One criticism I'd say of working at Funbag, and it wasn't their fault, was that it's all freelance work, right? Contract work, I should say, not freelance. We were contractors. It wasn't a full-time employee. And they warned us ahead of time. They said, hey, if we don't have any work for you, we don't have any work for you. So, anticipate that there may be a period of time when we don't have any work. So we're not taking any taxes off. We're just paying you piecework. And just make sure that you have money set aside for when there's any work. And we'll give you as much of a heads up as possible. But this was during the boom. I think we were out of work 1 week. For 1 week, we didn't have anything to do, which was a welcome break, all things considered. And me being me and being all paranoid young dude, I was worried that, oh, jeepers, I can't turn down anything. Never say no to any work. And it was intense. And I found that it was burning me out quite a bit, working all hours. Oh, here we go, the dig.
So here's your scene.
Oh, yeah.
The excruciating pain.
Oh, that was the pull. They slammed it on. Yeah, there it was. Yeah.
Wow, this is such an amazing scene. So you worked only on the cutscenes themselves?
I do not recall doing any of the yeah, I'm pretty sure it was only the cutscenes.
So first of all, you should know that I consider The Dig as one of the best computer games ever created. As you can see, my background is of The Dig.
Below there. I see him. That is all right. Oh, pixelated.
And the interesting part about the cutscenes is the game was in production for so long that the in-game graphics were beginning to look outdated. And so they decided to spice it up with the cutscenes themselves. Because if you look at Full Throttle, for example, which was released 7 months before the Dig, they have bigger character sprites and they have more detailed graphics. But the Dig, which was released in November 1995, had sprites like they used to have back in the early 90s, like in Monkey Island 2 and in Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. So that's why they decided to spice it up with the cutscenes. So I'm glad to hear that you got to work on these magnificent cutscenes. Now, given the fact that, like I said, there were several iterations because of the long development process, was because they had several iterations. They had 4 project managers, and there were tons of changes during the development itself. Did you have a chance to see any of the artwork or animations from the earlier versions?
Yes. I recall seeing something, but it was more a cautionary tale. And I'm sorry, it's been a long time. And I had no idea. No, that's not true. Kevin and Charlie gave me the dirt. And it was Jerry Bertolo gave me the dirt on the project. So I was aware of the fact that the Dig was like the game that had to be done, but nobody wanted to do. And the whole conversation, I mean, this is hearsay again. You probably heard this. The source of the project was a conversation between Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and that's why we couldn't cancel the project. The project couldn't be canceled, and because George would ask her, "So how's the Dig going?" And then they're like, "Oh yeah, it's going." and Sean was determined to put a stake. Sean Clark was determined to drive a stake through the heart of this project and get it done right. And I recall some strange looking 3D stuff, but I can't describe it. I'm going to say it was space. It wasn't. We didn't end up using any of it. That's the other thing. It was really strange 3D stuff. I'm sorry if you guys.
Are you talking about some character animations? There are animations that Anson Ju did for the first 2 versions of the Dig.
No, I don't recall seeing that. The character animations.
It was more of creature animations, like 6-legged creatures and such.
That doesn't ring a bell.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very well.
I do remember seeing some space stuff. But again, it was just a long time ago. But even back then, I said, God, it's a pixelated mess. And I can't speak to, and I would not speak to the reasons why the previous versions got canceled. I wasn't there. I wasn't hired at the start of the Dig project. It was basically in production, and there I was being brought on to help out, and so we could finish it. So the only thing I know about the previous versions is hearsay, and that they were canceled, and that it was a tough project to get done. And so I said, well, okay, great. As far as I was concerned, I was just happy to be there. Right? I figure out, I don't know why people don't like this. It's fun. And Sean agreed with me. He said, all right, this is a fun project. Let's do it. But we got it done. Yeah, that was my first game that shipped. And I remember the tchotchke pad where they had astronaut ice cream inside a box and a bunch of other stuff. I wish I still had that box. It was the pack that was given, gift pack that was given to everyone who worked on it.
With a fridge magnet that says, I dig the Dig?
Yep. All those little goodies that were in there. Is that what it said? I can't remember.
Yeah, it said, I dig the Dig.
Okay. And yeah, I do remember I had that freeze-dried ice cream for a long time, and I did not eat it. Yeah, at one point. It went the way of the island beer. I didn't drink the beer, and then I ended up emptying the bottle.
Anyway, in my conversation with Charlie Ramos, who was also an animator on this game, he mentioned that each animator brought their own unique style to the characters, which led to a variety of looks for the same characters. Like Boston Low would look different in each and every cutscene, and Brink would look different in each and every cutscene. Did you find yourself adapting to a particular style for continuity, or were you able to bring your own approach to the characters in your own cutscenes?
I mostly went with the lines and the personality of the character as I saw them as they were written. That, and I don't remember if we had model sheets. We had some visual reference for the characters, because I know I didn't make him up out of it was a German guy. That was the one who was pulling the
Brink.
Brink, right. Brink was the work that I did with Brink. I knew what his voice sounded like because we had the lines done, and I had a description of the character given to me. So, this very arrogant man who usually tries to be very controlled and disciplined. Somewhat stereotypical. He's very German, and it's somewhat stereotypical, I thought. But he's the sort of person that would actually be okay with having his hand cut off if it meant saving his life, and he'd be pragmatic about it. And that I remember. I was very, very aware of his personality. As for following someone else's art style, no. I used what reference I had, and I ran it by Bill. And it was a very small team. We all saw each other's work pretty regularly. And the feedback was very open. There wasn't any. I don't recall there being any. There wasn't whatever the opposite of toxic is.
Great.
Amongst the artists, at least. But Charlie had been animating on that project longer than I was, so he may have noticed that. And certainly people notice stuff in retrospect where it's like, hey, we're not actually unified on this. I know for feature animation, it's generally a good idea to assign a one character per animator, or at least to make sure either one character or this group of characters are given to one animator. That way they can, in terms of their motion and their behavior, they can be visually consistent. But as far how the production was and how the characters were assigned for the dig, and I don't know. You said, hey, do this. And so, okay, all right. I was a gunslinger, right? Yeah, I'd ask questions and then I'd go.
Now, given the dig's extended development, management was, understandably eager to wrap things up by the final months.
Mm-hmm.
What was the atmosphere like within the animation team as you approached the finish line?
For most of them, it was relief. I know at one point, there was a lot of pressure on us, and pressure for quality and pressure for unity of vision. And Kevin got promoted to lead animator towards the end, and he ended up and just to get things more organized. I'm actually remembering this as we're talking. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. Boyle got promoted to lead animator. He was asked to do that, and that really streamlined the process a lot more, having someone in charge of it. Bill Tiller was still the lead artist on the project, but because of the volume of animation that was required, then that's the nature of adventure games, especially with regard to cutscenes. Then it does require a bit more organizational effort. But I also recall the relief on the team was like, all right, we got it done. But the relief in the company was, I mean, he was, hey, you got the dig done. I was like, no, thank you so much. I was like, oh, you drove a stake through its heart. And that it was different. I was like, whoa, he's up. I mean, I'm new here. I'm actually enjoying myself. Stop it. You make it seem as though we were doing some arduous and horrific task, like, look, for me, it was like, nope, this is fun. This is a lot of fun. And there could be points where there was pressure, but the standard pressure of work. But I always remind myself, like the toughest job I ever had in my life was working on a dairy farm for the summer. And, and nothing but respect for farmers and especially dairy farmers. That was the hardest job I ever had. And whenever I have a bad day, I remember that and I say, this is easy. This is first world problems. This is what this is. And granted, working on the dig, it wasn't even, because I suspect because I wasn't senior, then that, my attitude was basically just what's in front of me, what I need to know in the context to get this done. That's all I need. And so I didn't have the kind of pressures. I can't imagine the kind of pressure on Sean or Bill or those guys saying like, hey, this thing is, how many times you've tried to do this and it hasn't worked out. Please get it done and whatnot. That was, and so I'd avoided that. But I was very surprised, at how it was like a celebration for the company. Right? Or where most of us were just kind of like, all right, another day out the job, and it was fun to do.
So I'm happy to hear that you enjoyed working on the dig because, like I said, it's one of my favorite games. So as you would imagine, I interviewed tons of people who worked on the dig.
Yeah.
And most of them, and when I say most, it's like 90% of them hated the game and hated working on the dig. I had to keep interviewing people until I found someone who actually enjoyed working on the game. So I stumbled upon Michael Land, who worked on the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And he really enjoyed it. And the soundtrack is magnificent. It's a masterpiece. And the thing is, the reason why he enjoyed it is because he wasn't part of all of the drama. He sat in his room in solitude and worked on the soundtrack. And one day he had the soundtrack ready and he did what he wanted with the soundtrack. It's, when I talked to him, he said that it fits the musical style he's looking for in his compositions. So that's why he enjoyed it so much. So I kept on interviewing people. Hopefully I'd find a second person who enjoyed working on the dig. And Dara was the second person. But again, I've talked to 10 people between Michael and Dara, and all of them hated working on the dig. Chris Brown, all of them. So thank you for being the third person who enjoyed.
It's telling that that being isolated and focused and away from the drama, or being a late arrival, those are things that we have in common. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the pressures on the project, I learned from, a lot of the pressures and a lot of the feelings that, we're pariahs. We're only working on, we're away from the main studio. Used to call us the leper colony, and that's why, because we're working on the dig, which is like, and the references to the curse of the dig and whatnot. But, for those of us that are relatively new to the studio, it was like, it's, it's a job and it's fun, compared to, whatever. I didn't, I guess because I didn't have a history with the company yet, I didn't get the politics at all. I didn't get that.
And, I didn't interview Sean yet. Mm-hmm. So I'm terrified of the day in which I'll interview Sean and he'll tell me as the project lead how much he hated working on the dig. So at the moment,
to me once is they handed me a paper bag full of broken bits and said, please assemble this. That's how he felt when he got the dig.
So were there any last minute changes or scenes that were inexplicably cut in the final stages of production?
Not that I recall. There may have been, but not that I recall. I know that there were some jeepers. I'm trying to remember. No, I can't. I can't remember the details. There was some little bit of drama at the end, but I'm sorry, it was too long ago.
No worries.
Yeah.
Now, in 1996, you were credited for your work on the Macintosh version of the dig. Did the transition to the Mac version require any adjustments to the animation process, or were no changes needed from your end?
They may have credited me for it, but I don't recall working on it. I know that Mac transfers were done. Mac versions were done, but I don't recall working on it at all.
No. Okay, because at the time, they hired Aaron Giles around that time, and he worked on the Mac versions. So if you're credited on the Mac version, it's because you worked on the DOS version, they used your work. So
the work, yeah. I had no exposure to it I don't recall ever having to go in and touch up anything. So
very well. So moving on to 1997. In 1997, you worked on The Curse of Monkey Island as a 2D animator. What were some of the key visual elements you contributed to?
I did character design work for a lot of the secondary characters on that game. I once again, adventure games. So a lot of work in cutscene animation. The one I recall most is actually I still have recorded as Guybrush. Elaine was afflicted with petrification. Guybrush slipped a diamond ring on her finger and she came back alive, but she was about to throw a punch when she was petrified. So she completed the punch and punched the shit out of Guybrush. and that was the scene I recall. And that was fun to do because I distorted his face. The appreciation for the art style of Monkey Island, for one. Here's the thing, working on the dig, hyper-realistic, or as hyper-realistic as you could get with the technology back then. The cutscene animation, it was very human-type characters. They had to be relatable in the sense that, the original plan, that, from what I understand, they wanted to make this a live-action film, right? And then, somehow or the other ended up being a computer game. So that was the approach. It's okay, no cartoon physics, no super exaggeration and squash and stretch. Everything has to look as though, your animation should be using more, make more use of successive breaking of joints. Don't distort the characters. Monkey Island was like the opposite, or very different, very stylized, extremely colorful, like really very, very colorful, very not just in terms of physical color, but just in terms of the gestures and personality of the characters, or what's the word to picaresque, kind of over the top, very effusive and whatnot, exaggerated, while still being charming. That was the most important thing about Monkey Island. There we go, charming. Oh, there she is. Oh, it wasn't stone, it was gold. Gold, right.
Look at that.
Yep, here we go. Bam! Well, that's my scene. Yeah.
Elaine, are you all right?
That wasn't mine. I don't remember if that was.
Wait, so you worked on the punch itself, and then the rest of the cutscene was done by someone else? How does that work?
Start from the beginning?
Okay, so the beginning is the gameplay. So you use the diamond ring on her.
I can't remember if I did the ring. This is me. This is still me. I don't remember doing that. I think that was someone else. I don't remember doing that either.
You're okay. We're on Blood
Wow.
But
So it's interesting because you see that she has different facial expressions between
Island. Are you
the
alright?
scene you actually worked on and the scene someone else worked on.
You're okay.
Yeah,
We're on Blood Island.
Wow.
Logan's ring had a
I don't think I did
terrible
that
curse on it, but
because the facial
everything's
structure
fine.
changed.
It's safe and everything's gonna be
I know.
fine.
So what's up with the continuity?
Gunslinger, remember? They wanted me. I guess after that whole thing with the on the dig, they said, "Hey, let's get Chris to do the action scenes." You know, I don't know. Either that or I may have picked it. I can't remember, but that was yet. Here's the thing. This was one of the reasons I was really determined to try to become more senior, be a lead. I only had a window into the projects that I worked on early on. I was an animator, and the joke was, hey, we're gunslingers. Once we're done, we move on to another project, right? We don't get to see, they don't keep us around for the post-production process, and we don't get to see a project through to the end. Also, we don't see the beginning of the project either, because we're not around for the pre-production process. Pre-production is art leads and the directors and, you know, the producer and maybe as minimum number of artists needed as possible. And post-production is whoever is needed to process the art and do any cleanup or whatever at the end. So a lot of the times I'd get on the project and receive a list of assignments and then ask the questions I needed in order to do the assignments. And again, contextual questions like, hey, what's the character look like? Is there a model sheet? You know, are there previous samples of the animation, so on, so forth, and then work from there. Do a rough, run it by the art director or the animation director or the animation lead and the rest of the team. And if they said, hey, that looks good, or any feedback, then do a final and then finish it up. I didn't do the inking and painting. I just did the animation. That was also done by a different department as well. It was different because, like, for the 2D stuff, very time consuming process. Even digitally, I mean, it'd be horrific if we had to do it physically, like actually inking and painting by hand with materials. But even then, it was, compared to the 3D, it took a lot longer to do.
Now, as you know, this game is part of an established series. It's the third in the series. Did you get to play the first two games before working on this one?
I've played part of the first game. I was told number 2 had I played part of the second one. I never did the playthroughs entirely. I play the hell out of the game that I'm working on, though. You know, if there's a playable version, I will play it. And it's good to be informed about that. How your work looks in the context of the rest of the artwork in the game is important. It should fit.
So when you play the game, in order to see your artwork as part of the game itself, did you use a walkthrough? Did you have save games for these particular scenes? Or did you actually play the game from beginning to end just to watch the scenes you worked on?
I played the entire game from beginning to end. That was Curse of Monkey Island. I did. Yeah, I did. I played it through. I recall that. Don't ask me about the specific occurrences in there, though. It was a long time ago, and I played a lot of games since then. I loved looking at the work of the other animators in particular. Who else worked on? Kevin McAuliffe was a fellow animator I worked with on that, and he did. He had a scene I wish I'd done where LeChuck had a flaming beard, and he was transforming. And at the time, I thought, "Wow, that's beautiful." I wasn't sure how I would have approached it, but stuff like that. I mean, like basically learning from my peers, and but yeah, that was. I have to say, yeah, Curse of Monkey Island, probably one of the most beautiful games I worked on at LucasArts.
Wow. That's a bold statement.
I thought it was lovely. I really did.
It was lovely, and in recent years, it's become everyone's fan favorite in the Monkey Island series because, for me, I was 8 years old when Monkey Island 2 came out, so this was my first Monkey Island. Nowadays, the people who were born around the early 90s and played, Curse of Monkey Island when they were 6 or 7, then it became their favorite Monkey Island. So my theory in general is the first Monkey Island game you play is your favorite. That's the theory. So nowadays, all of the people who were born in the early 90s get into the workforce. So you get to hear that they enjoyed the Curse of Monkey Island the most. Now, Graham, in my conversation with him, described a strong sense of camaraderie within the animation team. Was there a particular moment where that team spirit helped you overcome a challenge during production?
Yeah. It helped a lot that we're all gunslingers together. And I know some of the animation challenges we had, mainly had to do with, for lack of a better term, like I would say lack of guidance. And I wouldn't say it's a challenge. It's just this. A lot of times you didn't get a detailed storyboard, for example. You got a scene description, you got sound, you got like a rough idea of what it was, but you really needed, because we're all in this little cluster with our cubes, and we're all working together. And because of the nature of the digital work, it would be like me popping up and saying, "Hey, can you come take a look at this?" And no problem. You could pretty much ask anyone, and then other heads would pop up like a little gopher colony and say, "Hey, can I look at it too?" And we'd all look, right? And that sense of that's one thing I love about a studio environment. The idea that, hey, you can grow with the people around you because you have. You're not just alone, working in a log cabin making storyboards with the feedback once a week. It's if you want it, the feedback is continuous, and suggestions can be made. And I found that is really important for improving as an artist. The other thing that improving is like those people who are senior to you can give you the wealth of their experience as well. And I didn't get a sense of there wasn't a sense of I guess that's partially because of the nature of their hiring process. But like, there were no bad apples, as I recall, amongst the animators. There was no sense of ego or that horrific situation where you're working with someone who says, "I cannot advance up the ladder without stepping on your hands and heads." That sort of person who is very, very not fun to work with. That there was no backstabbing, politicking, or whatever. I didn't get a sense of that amongst the animators anyway. But yeah, Graham's correct in that respect.
Now, as you know, the first two games were done. The first game was pixel art, and the second game had scanned backgrounds because a scanner was the main feature of that particular game, in which they used scanned backgrounds instead of drawing them using a mouse. And so the third game, Curse, looks vastly different than the first two. Did you ever feel any pressure to honor the original style of the first two games?
No, we were all pretty much sold on the art style compared to the others. That sort of blocky pixel look, while quaint, was nothing compared in terms of quality to Curse of Monkey Island. Was way cleaner. Even given the limitations of CD-ROM. It was much cleaner, and but even the so-called pixel animation, I mean, like the rotations for the characters moving around on the screen, that's line art, right? Very detailed and clean-looking line art. It looked like a real cartoon, and I know that I was pretty critical of. I made one criticism from some of the background artwork, but in retrospect, the backgrounds, I said that once it looks kind of murky and underwater, and Bill didn't like that. But in retrospect, when I look at the game nowadays, it's like, God damn, this game is beautiful. It really is. And all of the artists, it's a credit to them. All the background artists, the animators, everyone who worked on it should be proud of that game. It's beautiful. The cutscene animation, everything.
I
I
agree.
certainly use, unconsciously when I was on Escape from Monkey Island, I was definitely thinking and said, okay, that's the standard, right? In terms of the visual standard, Curse is the standard. But I'm working in a very different medium here, and I'm trying to capture that here, which was the choice I made at the time. As far as the art direction, I'm not sure we'll get to that, I imagine.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But still in 1997, you contributed to Outlaws as part of the animation team. What specific scenes or characters did you work on?
I worked a lot with the main character, and I was doing cutscene animation. Again, not in-game animation. I did cutscene animation. That was Charlie Ramos was the art lead on that project, as I recall. And his art style was really hard for me to wrap my head around, and no, not Charlie's fault, not blaming him, not bad-mouthing him in any way, shape, or form. He had it was definite stylization, and that was my first exposure to a type of stylization. I really wasn't familiar with the really long arms and legs, the huge hands on the character. I mean, I remember the main character could literally grip his own head like a basketball, like a grapefruit. But that was a style. And so that was an adjustment. I did quite a few cutscenes for that game. It
was supposed to look like Ian Flux in style.
Yes.
And in my conversation with Charlie, he praised your work on Outlaws. And I want us to watch a short snippet from that conversation.
I think it was based on Ian Flux stuff. And then the animators kind of, once they latched onto the ideas, they really pushed it forward. Chris Miles was one of the main animators on this, and I think he really took to it. Out of all of them, I think he's the one that really kind of understood the look that I was going for, and the feel of the action, and some of his shots are some of the most kind of spidery and insect-like and stylized motions out of all of them, and really well drawn stuff too.
Bless your heart, Charlie.
Well played.
Well, I'm glad he liked it. I know Darren liked it because Darren Stinnett, he liked. That's just because Leslie Claro, she told me Darren really likes your stuff, and I was like, really? Okay. I sometimes I get tunnel vision and I'm thinking, oh God, this is tough. This is so, God, this looks like crap. But it's like, all right, do the best you can, whatever. It's like his giant ass hands, and he's got to hold a gun in it. Right? Okay. I'll try to figure out how the fingers and work with the gun and whatever. But overall, I look at the stuff now, and it was like, hey, that actually turned out pretty good for what. Yeah, turned out pretty good. I'm very glad that Charlie in particular, that he liked it. Also, to tell you the truth, it's such a different perspective when you look at the work after a few years, and like years go by, and that was like almost 30 years ago, and you look at it, and then you remember, and it's just kind of like, wow, that actually was not. It's like I said about Chris of Monkey Island, like. After that shipped, and I thought, yeah, it looked pretty good. Okay, try to keep in that art style. But now, when I look at anything from that game, I say, God, that game is gorgeous. I think that was the most beautiful version, I really think, of Monkey Island.
Yeah, because after a few years, you become less critical of your own work, especially if it's a few decades. And moreover, when you're working on it, then you get to watch it each and every day over and over again. And then it becomes less special. But then after a few decades, there are probably scenes in Curse of Monkey Island that you forgot that you ever created or worked on, or that they even were a part of the story itself. So it's like a nice surprise. You get to experience the game like we did as players.
Yeah.
You just need to wait 3 decades. So no.
Yeah,
biggie.
you forget enough. But yeah, Bill Tiller and I think Maria Bowen was one of the background painters, I remember. But Bill was he really did a great job in terms of directing the look of that game. And Larry Ahern, of course, and I think it also, I don't know, maybe it's a generalization, but Larry was a director whose background was as an artist, and I think that made a lot of difference.
Now, your work was highly regarded, like we just heard from Charlie, and Outlaws in general is usually praised for its attention to details in animations and environmental interactions in general. What were some of the more subtle animation details you're most proud of in the game?
My inspiration, or where I went to for inspiration for that game, was spaghetti westerns, because that seemed to be the like the well. But as far as the look and feel of the characters. But the problem with spaghetti westerns was like those are again, it's like human type characters, but being translated into Charlie's very stylized look for the game. What I liked most about the game, and this may sound odd, like I did a lot of stuff in terms of action analysis and motion. There's one shot where I can't remember the main character's name, but he jumped on a train and he spun his pistol when he drew it. And I had him do like a little twirl with the gun when it stabilized. But the shot I liked more was when he was the subtle things, like the close up on faces when the character is speaking, and the focus on the eyes. And I got that from like watching what is it? The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The final graveyard scene, I don't know if you're familiar with it, where Lee Van Cleef, Clint Eastwood, and Cheapers, Tuco, or whatever the actor's name, I forget. But Tuco and the three of them are facing off against each other, and almost every frame was just the eyes, and they're looking, and the focus is on the eyes. So again, it's sort of animation principles. Again, focus on the anticipation and the recovery. And because the anticipation, when they actually drew and fired, it was really fast. It was like that. But so much time spent, on the drama and whatnot. So that was the stuff that I tried to focus on. And when I was doing animation for Outlaws, I can't remember the name, was the young red-haired guy got shot, and he slams into a wall and he slides down, and he's dying and he's bleeding out. And I spent a lot of time on the recovery. After he slides down and he's lying there, and but we cheated the mouth, right? It stayed same, and then just had like just the mouth moving with the blood soak. But I remember little Dave, I can't remember his last name. He was one of the animators, and we put a pillow on a wall, and I kept throwing have someone else throw Dave into the pillow, and he'd hit it, and then he'd slide down. And I'd keep watching him. This is before, using video camera reference and whatnot. So we used to do that a lot, like live reference, like actually watch someone do the action.
So this was your version of motion capture, trying to kill your colleagues?
Yeah. Yeah. Later on, of course, that would be you just videotape it. Nowadays, you just catch it on your phone, right? But that was before then. For a lot of action analysis, we'd act things out. Wow, Lucas was really supportive when I think about it back then. I remember there was life drawing classes, the visits from the really amazing artists that would come by and give us talks. Sorry, I'm just rambling.
Lucas was awesome, given the fact that they didn't fire you for throwing your colleagues up against the wall. So. Assault with consent is not assault. He knew what I was doing. We put the pillow there, and I said, Dave, do you mind if we, and he said, like, yeah, sure. And then throw him and watch him. It was great. Now, what was your approach to animating the action sequences, and how did you manage to keep them fluid enough to meet the system requirements of the time?
I didn't give a rat's ass about the system requirements. It's like, whatever, make it work. Just tell me what the frame per second is, and I'll animate accordingly. Traditional animation is taught with 24 frames per second. But you only do 12 drawings if continuous, due to the principle of persistence of vision. You don't draw every single frame unless you're a lunatic, like the Roger Rabbit guy, Richard Williams, that type of thing. But he just did it to show off. But for the most part, you animate on twos, which means that 24 frames a second, you only require 12 drawings for every second of animation. But even then, you can animate on fours. You can use less drawing. It just looks choppier if you do that. I can't remember what the frame rate was for Outlaws, but I do remember it wasn't increments of 12. It was like 30.
Maybe 15 or
15. Yeah, 15 or 30, around thereabouts. So once that is established, that's all I need to know. Because it's like, okay, that's the run speed that's the speed at which it's expected to run at. With regards to like the file sizes and such like, that's handled in post. Like, I didn't ink and paint it. I animated it at that frame rate that is expected. That gets scanned in. The ink and paint people take over, and then compression to make sure, it's runnable. That's all post. No, we didn't do that. I didn't have any exposure on that. I gave some feedback after the ink and paint process was done, just like, okay, how's this look? And said, yeah. I know in one scene it was like, I think I mentioned to the ink and paint person, I was thinking the face would be a bit bloodier here or whatnot. But for the most part, those guys did a magnificent job. Many, many hands were wrecked. And up until we got styluses, all that mouse work, that's a different story in and of itself. All right, I'll tell it. Going to California and seeing people complain about, oh, my hands. I said, what is this bunny frou-frou nonsense? Carpal tunnel, that's made up bullshit. And until I got it. All right, I actually had it. So like, I lost the feeling in my hand. I couldn't raise my arm. My shoulder was killing me. And I'm like, this can't be real. And they had an ergonomic specialist come and look at my work setup, and she was horrified by it. And you got to take care of yourself, and doing things like wrapping a huge chunk of plasticine around your stylus so it opens your grip more when you're using it. And the mouse work, just being very careful about handling your mouse and your position of your shoulders. But sorry, that's just an aside. But it's not bunny frou-frou. It was real. A lot of people got carpal tunnel. and the ink and paint. Anyone doing extensive work with a mouse had to be very, very careful about
Oh,
that.
that's why you get a trackball instead of an
Trackball,
actual
yeah,
mouse.
good idea. Yeah. Nowadays, I work with a Cintiq and a stylus, and I haven't had to wrap my stylus in plasticine to open my grip. I mean, I've been doing fine so far.
Now, still in 1997, you were listed under additional thanks in Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2. What were you thanked for? And did you have any involvement in the project beyond being thanked?
Nope. Dark Forces 2.
Yeah, Jedi Knight.
Jedi Knight. Okay. I may have given some good advice, but that's it. I don't recall any artwork I did for that.
Well, good advice is good enough.
Yeah. Now, that was Dark Forces 2. That was don't make me guess. Who are the leads on that?
You want me to tell you? It was Justin.
Okay.
Justin Chen.
Justin Chen. Okay. Right. Because Darren was Dark Forces 1. Justin did Dark Forces 2. No, I don't recall. I remember it was well received as a game. It was Dark Forces 1 was like a huge moneymaker for LucasArts, and Dark Forces 2 was very well received as a game. I remember liking it, but no, I don't recall working on it.
Very well. Now, speaking of 1997, I found a contact list of LucasArts employees from May 1997. Mm-hmm. Do you remember your extension number by any chance?
Nope. Not a chance.
Come on.
Oh my God.
So, Chris Miles, Art.
828, yo. 82. Oh man, so many of those names. C. Andrew Nelson, Camilla Boswell. Oh my God.
Brett Mikulewski.
Bogey, yep.
Look at all these people.
I know.
And security. You can call security.
Mm-hmm.
Or reception.
Christina Napier, Chris Week. I'm still in touch with Chris Weekly.
Hal Barwood.
Yep. Gwen Listenago, yeah. Al Chan. Wow. Memories.
Now, moving on to 1998.
Yep.
When you're credited for character animation in Grim Fandango. Now, Grim Fandango placed 3D characters in pre-rendered environments. What were some of the artistic challenges you faced in animating characters within this format?
This was the result of an impetus to shift to 3D from the 2D for reasons. One challenge was learning it. And they were good about that. I remember a whole bunch of us got sent down to San Francisco, and they had some trainers from Alias Wavefront come up and give classes, instructions. And the company picked up the dime for all this. We'd drive down there every day. And I can't remember. I think it was only about a week's worth of training, crash course. It was 1 or 2 weeks, one or the other.
But you learned 3D in a week?
We learned the rudiments of it, and then we learned I learned on the job, basically. I was given, the first wave were Killer Impact computers with Saftimage. And maybe it wasn't a week, may have been a month. I'm thinking now that you mention it, it was like, geez, a week doesn't seem like enough time. But
yeah,
main point is they paid for our training and they provided us with the machines. I do not recall anyone on staff from ILM being hired by Lucas to teach everyone else. I could be wrong in that regard. But it wasn't as if we didn't have 3D experience in the studio. I mean, Dark Forces, and Jedi Knight and such like. There were a few games that already used 3D, but they were using 3D Studio Max, I believe, and Lightwave. And Softimage at the time was being touted as this really great cinematic character animation tool. But, we were thinking, hey, they're using this in Terminator. There's no way we can afford to get it in, for us. But turns out they were very wisely thinking we should support other things besides television, besides film production. And the O2s were these smaller SGI boxes that were more affordable and that could run Softimage. And that was back when I guess the returns from games weren't on the scale of films, obviously. But I loved Softimage when I learned it. I didn't, let me rephrase. I liked it more than Max, mainly because it had inverse kinematics, so it was easier to animate using that. But as far as an experience, I'd already known not to be intimidated by animation. But like way back when we were at Sheridan and the recruiters had come along, we had a Pixar recruiter. It was John Lasseter himself. And he stood back when he was top dog at Pixar before his fall from grace. He stood in front of us all and he held up a pencil and just said, look, don't be afraid of the computers. It's just a very expensive pencil. That's all. And so that was my mindset. And also, considering the experience I'd previously had with graphic design, you really have to get used to the idea of your, whatever you're working at, the tech. If you're on technology changes, right, and you have to be prepared for any changes in technology if it ends up trending in such a way that the old tools that you've learned or the old skill sets you have may become obsolete more quickly than you imagine.
So you said that no one from ILM came to tutor you, but when I interviewed Kyle Balda, who was an intern at LucasArts and created the intro for Day of the Tentacle, and then went on to work at ILM, and he worked on The Mask and he worked on Jumanji. Then when I interviewed him, I noticed that in 1998, he's credited for additional 3D modeling on Grim Fandango. So I think that he joined in maybe for a few days to teach everyone at LucasArts. That's my theory. He didn't remember any of it. But
I don't recall that either. I recall the Alias Wavefront classes. And no, I don't recall. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I just don't recall it. Anyone from... I know that there was a fair bit of synergy with ILM on the Star Wars projects. There was a lot of synergy with ILM on those. But for non-Star Wars related projects, I can't recall us getting any training from any ILM personnel.
Okay.
Pete may have. It seems logical that they would train the leads at the very least. You'd have to ask Pete Sakel about that, though. I don't recall us getting.
Okay, I'll get him for a conversation. Now, unlike the established Scum engine, the Grime engine was being developed while the game itself was in development. Did this require you to constantly make changes to your design or design files based on the latest version of Grime?
No, what the approach initially for the characters for Monkey Island and was not Monkey Island, what I was saying, Grim Fandango.
Grim Fandango, yeah.
We had really tight specs as far for poly count, for size of the characters, everything, for the look. It helped a lot that the aesthetic was that whole, Mesoamerican, Day of the Dead, sugar skeleton look to the characters, so we could get away with it. The characters didn't need to be smooth and organic. It was okay if they were blocky, especially as far as the heads and such alike. And But yeah, I do remember that it was the challenges for that game were were a bit different as far as like Lupe. Yeah, that's one of mine. Yeah, and when I was doing the character design, I tried to keep that in mind as well. Although Lupe is probably not a good example of that because she's based on Leslie Aclaro, and because I kept thinking of Leslie when I was drawing it, and very upbeat, energetic, short character. Leslie Aclara was a producer on Grim Fandango, but Pete had designed the main characters, and then I like Manny and Meche and Hector and such like, and I did everything else, and I always had to keep that in mind. I'm not as informed about the technical limitations while they were doing Grime. I imagine, was it Mowgli who was doing that? Was it Mogilevsky?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that it was an arduous process. I mean, I left Grimm and it was still in production, and it stayed in production for quite a while afterwards. And when they shipped it, I do know that Tim took it to heart when the criticism for Full Throttle was it was a very short game. It was too short. So Grimm was not short. You know? Oh, hell no. 4 years within the game. The game, like literally 4 chapters in 4 years. And unfortunately, it got to the point where like, no, we need to ship this. And so year 3 and 4 were considerably shorter than 1 and 2, as I recall. But, it's sort of like Tim, Tim's whole thing was like, look, just let me do the art. The artistic vision must be fulfilled. Never mind about the money. You'll make the money back on the other end. Whatever time is. But again, that's something you should talk to him about, in terms of that. I don't know if he was disappointed with Grim Fandango at all, that he didn't do it the way he wanted to, as complete. I know that the game is, to this day, it's considered like, hey, this is like your gold standard in adventure games from LucasArts. I mean, like, tell me about another game like this. I mean, like, it's a film noir meets Mexican Day of the Dead. Try pitching that. Right? I mean, it's so strange. It's so weird. It's so Tim, Is it like it's creative, it's interesting, it's very, very it's clever, and it was fun to work on.
Wait, so when you said that you animated the secondary characters, did you animate Gladys? Or is he considered a main character?
No, I designed the secondary characters. I did the character designs. For animation, jeepers, I did a lot. I can't recall them all. I don't think I ever animated Glottis. I recall animating Manny, the CBs. I can't remember all of it. I have an easier time remembering the 2D stuff because, okay, 3D, faster, right? That's the one thing. You get more scenes done. You can do more footage when all you're doing is animating. 2D, longer. Takes longer to do. It took me longer to do. I'm speaking anecdotally. I just find, also you're doing your own in-betweening and your own cleanup as well. In feature animation in studios, this is the work's broken up more, but as animators working in 2D, you're doing it by yourself. You're doing all of it. Not all of it. You're doing everything up to the ink and painting. You're doing yourself. In 3D, once the models are made, then, and you're manipulating them, it's a different sort of satisfaction. But one thing about 3D is you can crank out way more footage. All right, you can get more done. So, yeah, I don't recall all the characters I animated on Grimm, but it was a lot.
And did you handle things like lip syncing?
Yes. We did our own lip sync. That was automated too, though. A lot of that. I found the best process was use the automation tools and then tweak it afterwards if necessary. But the way the lip sync worked, you had that's right, we swapped the heads out. You had the head shapes, multiple head shapes for the character, and then you ran the lip sync. It was either the head shape or it was the texture of the mouth. I can't remember which it was. It may have just have been the mouth texture. And there's little skeletons.
I think depending on the character.
Yeah, with the mouth. Glottis, I imagine they probably swapped his head out. But because he wasn't a skeleton, he was a demon or whatever. Yeah, he was a demon. But yeah, they swapped it out. And then you'd play the sound file and it would automate, the mouth. It was, I think it would automate either that or we keyed it while listening to a sound file. But I suspect it automated because, right, you could do it by hand if it was a cutscene, not in engine, but automated otherwise. The other thing Grime did was in-engine cutscenes as well, which is very different than what we did on Monkey Island. I mean, and so I know at one point, and was Dave Bogan told me that they ended up having to cannibalize one of the cutscenes I did to shift it into an in-engine cutscene, and he felt sad about it. But I didn't see it. I didn't see what the final result was. I recall certain cutscenes I spent a lot of time on. I spent quite a bit of time working on some of them.
Well, whatever cutscenes they swapped with in-game graphics looked better in the remastered version, because in the remastered version, the remastered elements are the in-game elements, because they didn't have the original source files for the cutscenes. So the cutscenes themselves are the same low-res movie files that they are playing. They upscale them, but still, they aren't at the same resolution as the rest of the game. Now, in the March 1998 issue of Next Generation magazine, you were interviewed. Do you remember that?
Nope.
Okay.
What did I say?
So the article is called "How to Get a Job in the Game Industry."
This was Canadian periodical, was it not?
I'm not sure, but over here in the art department.
Oh, there's my new in. My partner in crime. Yep.
And over here, wait. Over here. According to Chris Miles, artist / animator at Lucas, you don't have to be a programmer to figure out how to use art tools. It's also important to remember that unlike most disciplines in the game industry, getting started in the art department is more about what you know than who you know, and artistic talent demonstrated through a good portfolio is your best ticket in.
Oh my goodness. All right. Just that whole more about what you know than who you know, just put a line through that.
Yeah. I was just about to ask that. So first of all, you emphasize the importance of traditional art and animation training over purely technical skills. Do you still believe that a foundation in traditional art is as valuable today in the game industry?
I would say it's still valuable, but I would also say you can't get by at all without technical skills. Yeah. I mean, back when I started out, I was an animator. What I appreciated was that all the tools that were being made for with different time. Whole bunch of traditional animators brought in to games, and here are tools being made for them to use. Traditional animators with no technical background, right? No computer science backgrounds. That was back then. So a lot of the tools I always appreciated being user-friendly. This is designed so it's easy for animators to use. We are 30 years later in a very mature industry right now. The line between artist and technician is blurred and virtually non-existent in many cases, right? Workflows, optimization of workflows. Geez, I sound like a corporate manual now, don't I? Optimization of workflows requires a degree of technical skill that wasn't required back then. And
so that means that your second sentence is wrong nowadays as well, because you said you don't have to be a programmer to figure out how to use the art tools.
No, it's right. You don't have to be a programmer, right? You don't have to know like programmer language, but you do need to know, you need to understand your tools, right?
Maybe it's more essential in order for you to fully utilize the capabilities of modern tools. Okay, yeah. I'll give you that. But again, you said it's what you know, then who you know. Do you still think this is true in today's industry?
The only job that I've gotten from a cold call was in the animation and games industry. Was my first one when I was recruited by Funbag. After that, all of the jobs I've gotten is because of people I've known and worked with through that. I'm speaking anecdotally, but in terms of a cold like resume delivered to a studio, I've never gotten a job that way.
And speaking of people you've worked with, let's take a look at some photos. What can you tell me about this photo?
Yeah, that's Kevin in the middle. Kevin Boyle, I mentioned before. He's still working in the games industry. He's a producer. Oh, jeepers, I can't remember where. Executive producer, I believe. That's between us is Kathy Shea, extremely talented concept artist, and just generally just a great artist. I haven't been keeping up with her. I think she's still she's either an art lead or an outsourced art management right now. To the far left is my partner in crime, Mai Nguyen, originally from France, and she started, I think, the same year I did. We all started within 2 years. That whole photo there, the four of us. Mai is just all around artist. So she's like a lead art director, whatever outfit she's at now. I'm terrible with the names of studios. They just kind of melt together after a while. But yeah, every one of the people in this photo have worked in games for the past 30 years. This was a party at Yoko Ballard's house up in Petaluma. The previous photo is the same one. It was the same location. Yoko was an animator at LucasArts. The other four people I've described already. To my the gentleman second from the two people on the right-hand side, that's Clint Young and his wife, Dawn. And Clint is our friend from Texas, and he moved back to Austin, but he's still involved with Lucas-type projects. Clint was one of the few people I knew that could speak or could comprehend Huttese. And very, very, very passionate Star Wars fan. Very, very talented artist. He worked hard at it as well. When he came in, he was mainly a 3D guy. When honestly, I wouldn't say bad, but not the greatest drawing skills in the world. But he worked at it, and I've seen his work now, and it's fantastic. It's just fabulous. Really sweet couple. They're still married. They got a kid, and they're really nice people. Went to a few parties at his place. He's a good guy. He's a great guy. He might watch this. We're all still friends. Everyone in that photo, as far as staying in touch. Mai and Kevin in particular, we still game together. We did a role-playing games back in the day, and we're still gaming after all these years. Kevin, however, I knew from Sheridan. My Nguyen I met at Lucas, and we're still friends. And Clint I stay in touch with on Facebook. And Kathy I stay in touch with professionally and also as a friend. We work together. It's such a small world. That's the other thing. Our industry is so incestuous. Everyone knows each other. I worked together with Kathy at EA, at Pogo EA as well. What happens is if you end up working with someone and you like them, and down the road you find out that they're looking for a gig, you help them out. You help each other out.
So it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yes, that's why I said put a line through that. That may have been something I said on the very first job I had in an interview, but it's wrong.
So in the year 2000, you were credited for concept art and as a lead artist on Escape from Monkey Island, which coincidentally celebrates its 24th anniversary this Saturday. How did you approach the visual design of this sequel, and what were your creative goals as the lead artist?
This was after my stint on Grim Fandango. There were a few projects that were canceled in between this and Grim Fandango. Also, there was I was pulled from Grim Fandango to provide support for Curse of Monkey Island because they were falling behind. And I know there was a little bit of drama involved there. Tim wasn't happy to lose animators. And I was thinking of raising a fuss, but then I got reminded that, hey, be a professional, and never decline a job. And who am I to say, oh, you have no right to pull me off? Just do it. And so I went. And I was like, to me, as long as I was doing the work and animating, I was happy. But there was a certain amount of malaise I had about being a gunslinger. I was getting tired of it. I said, just for an experience, I would like to see a project from beginning to end, as opposed to just coming in and being a fill-in on those parts. And I thought that it would be a good experience for me. Art direction-wise, I had a really solid set of concept artists working with me on it. Eddie Del Rio being the primary one. And the characters, I was confident that I could design myself. I had looked at Larry's style and the work that and I'd worked with Larry on Curse, as far as the character designs and the rule number one, be charming, right? That's there's a certain, be fun. As far as the locations and the environments, it's kind of like wonky and whimsical. The real challenge was, this is a 3D game, right? And drawn animation has a look and feel, and 3D animation back then tended to look, the characters look blockier, and there were technical limitations on them. The limitations of 2D was more like time and imagination. And time is always a limitation, but the advantage of 3D is volume. You can crank out a lot of animation much more quickly. That's one advantage. The second advantage is editing. Don't like the way the character looks, just change it and the animation still works. Or requires minimal tweaking. Don't like the way the camera angle is, just change it. All of these things that would be very hard to do in pre-rendered 3D or pre-rendered 2D, for example, like any type of editing or changes you wanted to do to the scene. But first and foremost, I said, all right, I'm going to look at the previous version of Monkey Island, really look at it and see if we can capture that. level of charm and that level of polish in 3D. So there were certain visual motifs, like in Curse of Monkey Island, the clouds with their little curls, like ice cream like curls. We said, okay, we're going to do that in Escape. Like, so almost as though it looks more like a theater set than an actual physical world. Try to capture that in every scene. Avoid square, straight buildings if possible. Try to make them a little bit wonky. Like the proportions. I'll use the word term cartoon proportions, almost like, and make sure that the characters are proportionally, in terms of their proportions, it's not human proportions. The heads are slightly oversized, and the body proportions are such so that they have a stylized look reminiscent of Curse of Monkey Island. And that was what else that I can recall. Mark Overney was in charge of the animation. Was the animation lead. We didn't have a background artist lead, so I ended up taking that role, which I shouldn't have. I should have pushed for a lead background artist. I mean, I had experience as an artist and an animator, but again, this is something I'm just saying in retrospect. Probably not relevant to your question. Your question was at the time.
No.
No.
Go off on as many tangents as you want.
Just in terms of a more unified direction for the backgrounds, that success I laid at the hands, at the feet of our concept artists. They didn't require very much direction, or they didn't receive that much direction from me. As far as the modelers and the texture artists who built the pre-rendered backgrounds, again, we did some color correction after the renders were done, but to this day, I still feel as though we didn't quite. This is on me, by the way. This isn't on them. I didn't feel like I gave the direction necessary to capture that strange ethereal look that was in Curse. I wonder if it was even possible to do. I mean, I imagine it's possible to do that. I certainly see lots of 3D games nowadays that have that look and feel. And
nowadays, but back then, for one of the things I wanted to ask you is whether or not it's been 2 years. At that point in time, it's been 2 years since Grim Fandango was released. So in Grim Fandango, you used pre-rendered backgrounds because you couldn't have that many polygons on screen. But did you even try to have non-pre-rendered backgrounds? Real-time 3D backgrounds?
No, we were using Grim Fandango technology for Curse of Monkey Island, with one exception. We couldn't use soft image. And that was more of a company decision, in that they wanted to assign those soft image seats to other projects. Star Wars. And in retrospect, I was pretty annoyed at the time, and my choices were 3D Studio Max or Lightwave. And as far as the modelers and texture artists were concerned, it wouldn't have mattered that much, but it was the animators I was thinking about, and I hated animating in 3D Studio Max. I had no IK, and it had, or the only version of IK it had at the time was Biped, I think the program was called. And I was not impressed with that. And said, I want inverse kinematics. I want to be able to anchor the characters so that they don't float around the place, anchor their feet. And it just makes a lot of the object interaction so much easier. In retrospect, in the perfect world, you have both 4K and IK, capabilities in your characters. That's the best of both worlds. But again, and then, the Lightwave users in the studio, Dan Colon and who was the other one? It was August. It was August Davies. Their thing was they were very much Lightwave fans. I used to joke that Dan must own stock with them or something. And Lightwave had come out with an animation, with animation tools recently that were comparable to Softimage. And the joke we used to make is this is like big button Softimage. And, but it was in beta. And so there was a risk involved with using it. But we'd said, but I was determined to make sure that the animators had, inverse kinematics. So I said, let's go with that. I'd rather do that than Max. 6 1/2 does none of the other, whatever. I mean, like, tools are just tools. And it worked out well as far as that. I was happy with the animation in terms of motion. There was a sort of a general rebellion from a lot of the artists, though, as far as the cutscene animation was concerned. Because I always fancied myself as much a gamer as an artist, right? And I like the idea of seamless cutscenes. The idea that the cutscene should look, the art in the cutscene should match the art in the game. But when you're doing it pre-rendered in 3D, you just crank up the polygon count on the characters, and suddenly all those jagged edges look smooth, and the lighting looks nice. And the first time I saw the pre-rendered cutscene, I said, "Geez, that looks so much better than what's in the game engine." And it was reminiscent of the old Final. Remember the Final Fantasy VII? I think it was Final Fantasy VII. The cutscenes didn't look anything like like the game. And the gamer in me was bugged by it, but the artist in me said, yeah, it looks better. Go with that. And in the end, I thought, well, the cutscene's supposed to be a reward. I mean, as far as the game loop is concerned, you know, the dopamine hit, this is it. So every effort should be made to make it look as nice as possible. So afterwards, I just kept my mouth shut. Okay, we can go with that. You know, and we let it go. And so, yeah, I was very proud of the work that was done on the Escape from Monkey Island cutscenes.
And the cutscenes also allowed you to do camera movement in the scene itself. And if you would have used the in-game graphics, then you wouldn't have been able to do that.
Exactly, because there was pre-rendered backgrounds in-game. We were still using pre-rendered backgrounds. We weren't, we weren't quite at the stage where we could run the backgrounds in engine. But cutscenes, you could do anything you wanted. Well, almost anything you wanted. Still took a hell of a long time to render, though, back then.
Now, given the switch to 3D models, which allowed only a limited number of on-screen characters at a time, how did this constraint impact your creative process?
It wasn't a problem at all. Sure, we couldn't do crowd scenes, but who the hell did crowd scenes back then? You know, for the most part, you know, and but no,
yeah,
it
but
helped a lot.
for example, in Melee Island, then in the first game, you're in Melee Island, and there are a lot of people, and in this game, they had to explain in the plot itself that the islands are empty because shops are closed and such. But still, you chose to use really wide shots of various locations from Melee Island when you could have done, closer shots of these scenes, and then it wouldn't have looked that empty.
That's the first I've heard of that as far as a criticism. I didn't think much about it at the time when we were planning it out.
No, the reason I'm saying this is, in the end, it was explained in the plot itself.
Right.
But my question is your choice of doing wide shots when there's just Guybrush in that scene.
This is in the in-game.
Yeah, in the
stuff. Yeah, in-game. I don't know. It just seemed natural, especially considering when you look at the 2D game, there are Curse, there are tons of wide shots where Guybrush is just tiny on the screen and you see the full background. I think part of it might be just to show off the art in the game. Here's the thing, for adventure games, we're very art intensive. right? But pre-rendered backgrounds also sort of frees you from having to worry about limitations, as far as, texture and polygon and, memory limitations, just a pre-rendered background where it's fake 3D, so to speak, but we have the 3D character moving around in it. But even then, 3D characters converted to sprites and such alike. That was a SCUM engine sort of solution. And I liked the wide shots, I remember, because so much time and effort was being spent to render these backgrounds and make them look tight, make them look nice. And I remember it from Curse. It may have been a leftover from Curse, leaving the backgrounds as wide open as they were. The other thing was I was dead set against doing things like, if there's a character on screen, I didn't like the idea of them not moving, which is an old animation trick, like there's stills, putting in stills and such alike. So if there's characters, they should at least have an idle, every once in a while. I remember in the bar scenes and such alike, just have some kind of idle animation going on. But yeah, the economic crisis of Melee Island was built into the game as part of the story, sort of paving the way for Ozzy to come in. Or I guess Ozzy was causing the crisis, so he could buy everything in sight. But
the limited number of polygons on screen also affected the scenes in which there were 3 characters or more. Then you'd have to create the upper body of these characters and maybe hide them behind something in order for them to be able to. Yeah.
Yeah, bars were great for that. Yeah.
And you also have the judges who stand behind the table, so you don't see the lower half of their bodies.
Yeah.
So did you find out the limitations of the engine as you moved along in the production of the game? Or did you know the limitations from the start and then you designed everything around that?
I'm pretty sure. I don't recall. I have a feeling that we kind of killed it. I have a feeling that we knew ahead of time, because this wasn't absolutely new technology that we were using. I mean, it was a variant on Grime. So these were things that poly limits were something we're familiar with. And I know that also informed us as far as the character design. We had specs for all the characters in terms of their poly size, the polygon limits. And it was a bit more challenging because these weren't based on papier-mâché, Day of the Dead effigies. These were based off of an art style passed on from, 3 previous Monkey Island games, right? And I was pulling from all of them, and that's while also trying to figure out, okay, whatever I do on paper, this has to be turned into a model, a 3D model with X polygon count limit. So always keep that in mind. Keep the designs as simple as possible, and do things like relying on your texture mapping to add complexity. But even the texture mapping, memory limitations on that were pretty nasty as well. I remember Elaine had a lot of details on her pants and on her and her hair, and things that I wanted to get in there, again, for that theatrical flair. All the curls and whirls in Guybrush's hair. And seeing them in engine, it's like, some of them were like, can you not make that texture larger? And it says, no, I cannot. And it's like, okay, it just looks a bit blurry there. Maybe tighten it up somewhere there. And
now we talked about the limitations of the Grime engine, but we also talked about the fact that you can change the camera. Before you worked on the pre-rendered backgrounds, you could change the camera for a scene and maybe animate something differently in ways that were much, much faster than you were used to when you did 2D animation. So in general, did you find the new engine and the switch from 2D to 3D more restrictive, or did you feel like it offered more creative freedom that you didn't have before?
6 of one, half dozen of the other. Going back to, I'll go back to what Lasseter said. Say, don't be intimidated. It's exactly the same. It's just it's just a very expensive pencil. With all due respect, I believe he's wrong. With what I know now, it's not a matter of better. It's a matter of different. The elation that, for example, the elation that I got from animating on Curse of Monkey Island is different than Escape. Animating in 2D is a pleasure of drawing and creating, but it's also the tedium of in-between and cleanup. Animating in 3D is more of an elation of enjoying the motion, and but it's closer, more akin to puppetry than drafting. Right, there's no draftsmanship there's no draftsmanship involved in the action itself. You might do some thumbnail drawings beforehand, but I know 3D animators that just go straight ahead, and they figure it's quicker for me just to do the posing. Just pose the character outright. The biggest advantage, but you can use 3D to leverage things. For example, we had 3 costume changes for Guybrush in Escape from Monkey Island. All right, doing that for Curse would have been grossly expensive. Right? Basically, you're going to have to make 3 sets of animations for all of his walk cycles and his movements and whatnot. And you said, what? In other words, you triple your drawings for everything involving Guybrush in the game for his in-game animations. And the cutscene animation all has to be customized with his different outfits. You do it in 3D, you said, okay, just make sure that his head is the same in all of them, and on all animated elements make sure the animation is transferable from one model to another, and then just swap it out. Right? So swap out the model, and it's relatively trivial. All right? So you can have multiple outfits. LeChuck, there are 4 or 5 versions of LeChuck in that game. All right? And I'm pretty sure we couldn't quite use the same animation for all of them. Effects animation had to be different for sure. I mean, he had a flaming beard in one. He's a glowy ghost in another version. But it's sort of a cliche to say one door closes, another one opens. You lose the creative flexibility that you do in 2D, where, again, your only limitations are imagination and, imagination and less technical, but more, you have so much flexibility in terms of okay, what I draw is what I get, right? But it's also limits you in terms of it's a time-consuming process. Back then, anyway. I mean, I don't know about the tools used for 2D nowadays, but it still can be a very expensive and time-consuming process. And it's unforgiving when it comes to editing, right? Or if someone does a criticism like, God, that camera angle sucks. How could you put it over his shoulder instead? So you have to redraw everything in order to do that, right? Yes, we could, and it'll take about as long as it did to do the first time, right? And whereas in 3D, it's like, all right, move the camera, we're done. And all right, maybe you have to tweak some other stuff because it revealed some other objects, but it's relatively trivial to do that in 3D. So in terms of the charm and the look of the pre-rendered 2D backgrounds in Curse and 2 and 1, but more so Curse, because I still think that should be the gold standard, or that would. At the time, I figured this is the gold standard. For the look of the characters, blockier, but that's out of necessity. We tried to make them as charming as possible with the limitations that we had. But we also did way more animations than in the previous versions. And we had way more footage and material, which is something that would have been prohibitively expensive if we try to do it in 2D. What I'm trying to say is you gain some on one side, you lose on the other. That was our feeling back then. Nowadays, it's very different because now, the 3D animation is way more polished, like up to like film level.
And now Mike mentioned that he collaborated closely with the artists on the game. Can you elaborate a bit on your collaboration with him and Sean on the visual aspects of the game?
Hours and hours we spent storyboarding out every single cutscene. They'd write, and they had their own system as far as getting the writing done, and then rather than me being isolated and drawing up the storyboards and then submitting them to them and then wandering off, we did it as a group. It was just the three of us. I do recall it was in the early stages of the project too. Like, we did a lot of planning on this. We did a lot of planning, and it's more a testament to the organization of Mike and Sean than anything else. And I know my concern was shipping on time and making sure that we scoped everything out. But that I'd learned from Grim Fandango. Actually, not just Grim. That's not. I shouldn't put that on them. But I'd seen other projects that had gone over time and over budget, and what inevitably happened, and I wanted to avoid was a situation where we'd have to cut parts of the game in order to make a deadline. So for me, it was like I'd done a little bit of production work on school projects at Sheridan. I'd worked as a producer over the summer on a project, so I wasn't completely unfamiliar with this process. But I really do feel that scoping your work out ahead of time and is very important. And I actually planned for crunch for the animation as well. I said, like, okay, we've scoped out how long. Once we did all that planning, there's a story around that too. Those little dickheads, right? I said, all right, we planned out all the animation. Mark and I sat down and worked it out, and we're finding that we're still short this 1 week. So we're telling you, 6 months down the road, we may need you to crunch for 1 week, or 2 weeks. I think it was 1 or 2 weeks. I remember. And they said, all right, no problem. So they started crunching immediately. So they didn't have to crunch later on. We didn't have to crunch at all on the project, the little Dickens. And so it was like, all right, I guess or they started putting in, rather than crunching one final push, they did it in little increments along the way. And I was trying to be transparent with them to tell them that we don't want to cut any of the animation from the project. Would it be okay if you worked a little extra in this part and just be upfront? But what I didn't want to do is death march him and put him, like, we're planning this so that no one gets death marched. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it's basically when a project goes into crunch for months and months and months at a time and burns out the entire team.
Like Grim Fandango.
I think I left before the death march began, but yeah, they were under a lot of pressure to ship that bad boy on time, and it wasn't. And like poor Tim was losing, he kept losing personnel. I remember they kept pulling people off his project a little bit at a time. Yeah. I don't know if it was a death march, but I do know that they were working hard.
It was. Brett was burned out at the end of the project.
Oh, man. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, good engine, though. We used it. Escape from Monkey Island. I don't know about the art team, though. I know everyone was... Schaefer's the kind of guy that is really good at generating loyalty and buy-in on his projects, I found. It helps that he's a charismatic fella. And yeah, I actually... I don't know. I felt a little guilty leaving Grim Fandango, but at the same time, it was kind of like, hey, this other project is shipping before you, and they need help now. And so I figured, okay, be professional about it.
In Wireframe magazine, issue 43, there's an article about the game, and it says over here that Chris Miles wanted to take the series into a more picturesque direction?
I may have referenced Pixar for it, insofar as this was the first time we were doing a 3D game. Sorry, a 3D version of Monkey Island. And what did Pixar have out at that time in early 90s?
There was Toy Story. Toy Story 2 came out in 1999. There was Bug's Life,
Bug's Life?
98.
Maybe. I mean, like, I do know that I pulled heavily. I pulled up a lot of reference before locking down the art direction for that, and a lot of 3D reference. But I can honestly say I pulled just as much from Curse as from anywhere else, right? You know, but I mean, Curse for 2D reference, but for 3D reference, sure. I would have been really jazzed if we turned out. I mean, Pixar was the cat's pajamas back then, man. I would have been jazzed if we turned out a game that looked like that turned out Pixar influence. But I mean, but I do recall being very realistic about it. If not, you know, like the engineers saying no, you know, be pragmatic. You know, like it's a computer game. I think Jonathan Ackerley put it best. It says making computer games for CD-ROM is like trying to suck a lake through a tiny straw, right? It's not going to happen, right? It's like, and I always remembered that. I just kept it in mind. And so like, wow, it'd be great if we could make the entire game look like a Pixar film. Okay, let's move on. And so Pixar-esque, whatever, you know, you could just as easily, you know, say we was trying to make it, you know, like Monkey Island 1-esque as well. I mean, like, sure. I did try to draw from as many influences as possible to get the best results. I mean, in the end, it's part of the creative process, you know, like not trying to copy, but certainly to be inspired by other people's work. So I won't deny that. But I don't recall specifically posting any images from any Pixar films up and say, hey, make it look like this. No, you know, that didn't happen. That never
now,
happened.
Escape ended up being the last graphic adventure game developed by LucasArts. Was it apparent at the time that Monkey Island and maybe the adventure game genre as a whole were being phased out at LucasArts?
No, because there was another one in production, Sam & Max.
I know. That's why I said it ended up being the last one.
Yes.
But
Sam & Max
was canceled, and Full Throttle 2, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But at the time, you know, they started working on Star Wars titles, and it seemed like they were focusing mainly on creating more and more Star Wars games. So the question is, even with 7 Max in production and with Full Throttle and 7 Max in production, did you feel like, in general, adventure games were being phased out?
Oh, not immediately. I was looking forward to working on my next adventure game. I was hoping I could lead it. Ever forward, brother. You know, like every step you take, you learn and you grow. And everything that I'd learned, like we did a very detailed postmortem on, or at least the artists at least did, you know, we talked about a postmortem of Escape from Monkey Island. And there are a lot of things I wanted to do differently for the next project. And I was pretty jazzed about doing another adventure game. And then hearing that, you know, Sam & Max got greenlit, but Graham was going to be the lead on that. I think it was Graham, right? Graham Annable.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just like, props to him. He's senior to me, and he's a great, you know, he's a great animator. It's a good choice. And then to discover that my next project was going to be Full Throttle 2, which was like, whoa, that's a lot of pressure. And it's not going to be an adventure game. And that was like, what? You know? And my next question I should have asked is then, why do you want me to do it? Right? You know, to be the art lead on this. And there were interim projects in there, I think, that occurred that were... You're getting a picture of the games that shipped. There are a lot of games. You're not seeing the picture of the cancellations.
Yeah, so that was my next question, because when we moved on to Escape from Monkey Island after Grim Fandango, you didn't have any credits in 1999, and then you mentioned that you worked on a few games that were eventually canceled. Can you elaborate a bit on what games you worked on at the time?
I can't remember them, a lot of them. I mean, there was a game I do recall. I worked with Gary Gaber on a game that was a Star Wars game that was an RTS, Force Commander, I think it was. That got canceled. There was another game I worked on with Larry, involving a stage magician who was also a thief. That got canceled. There's a game that I worked on, Herc's Adventures, that wasn't canceled and that did ship, where I was an animator on before I worked on Monkey Island, I think.
Yeah, it was released in 1997.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun to work on. That was important to me because that was me actually working with pixel art, which I hadn't done before. You know, it wasn't pre-rent. This wasn't cutscene. This was actual game animation that I did. There was Gladius 2, which was post Full Throttle, I think, and that got canceled. And those are just the ones I remember. I remember other people like John Knoll and Clint Young working on Sawyer. And that was a game that I think was planned to be, no, I won't say it was an adventure game, but that had some beautiful concept art. That got canceled. You know, that was a game that conceptually looked really interesting. It was like Goonies, style adventure game. I thought it would have been fun. That was a project I saw in its inception. It was like, geez, that'd be fun to work on, actually. And got canceled. We had a lot of that. But I can't recall specifically what I worked on after. I'm going to say Force Commander with Gaber in terms of what I worked on specifically after Escape from Monkey Island shipped.
Well, I'm going to tell you in a moment. But first, I wanted to ask you, since you've worked on both a 2D and 3D Monkey Island game, which art style do you feel suits the series best?
If we were going to make it now or back then?
In general, you can tell me in retrospect or with today's technology. In general, what do you think?
With today's technology, it will be 3D. You know, I can say that with this degree of certainty because A, it's more sophisticated and you have none of the limitations that we did back then. Hard for me to say back then. I mean, I've kind of explained it before. There are benefits and disadvantages to both. I would say that visually, honestly, Curse of Monkey Island is the most beautiful game. Visually. If I was only going to look at the visuals. As far as, and again, that's not meant as a put down to any of the artists, and certainly not the background artists and the concept artists working on Escape from Monkey Island. They did great work. It's just overall as a comparison, speaking as an art director. And that's just me being honest and again anecdotal. But as far as content and animation, I think the 3D works a lot better. You know, you just get more, right? You know, and that I can't speak as to the story myself. I had fun playing both games, right? And that's up to more to the consumer than anything else. But I don't want to give the impression that I certainly wouldn't give the impression to my fellow artists and game designers, etc., that one is better than the other. Absolutely. I'm just giving my opinion aesthetically, looking at it now, as opposed to when I looked at it back then.
And did you get to play the sequels, like Tales of Monkey Island and Return to Monkey Island?
No, I did see screenshots of them, and if anything, that's proof of what I'm saying. Like the 3D's come a long way since when we did it, right? The actual characters are way more complex, and I must confess that a lot of the way the characters looked in the in-game animation for Escape from Monkey Island was more of an expression of limitation than anything else. We did the best we could with what we could work with, and try to keep the characters charming. No such limitations, or far fewer limitations, exist now if you were doing something like that. But yeah, as far as the backgrounds and the art direction, I would have preferred to have an actual experienced background lead working on that, as opposed to me. That would have been better.
Well, you did a great job on the pre-rendered backgrounds. Don't belittle your work on the backgrounds.
I did the best I could, but and when I think about it more cold-bloodedly, I figured like maybe I should have gotten. Actually, I couldn't get one. I that was on my ass list at the time. I said, nope, it's on you. Also, you're doing fine. Don't worry about it. It's like, all right, okay.
Now, there's a mention of a caricature you drew of a three-headed monkey representing team members Randy, Ryan, and Rich.
Yep.
Can you share the story behind that sketch?
Nope. Just... I'm a compulsive doodler, and that's what I was known for at LucasArts more than anything else. I doodle during meetings, and I did caricatures of people. The other thing that happened was when you left the company, if you left on good terms, yep, there's that's Kevin. Oh, Smith, yeah, as an Ewok. When you left the company, then I would be approached, can you do a caricature? And that was the thing. I would do a caricature of the person who was leaving the company, and they'd receive it as a gift. And yeah, I have sketchbooks just full of meeting caricatures. I may have done Rich, Kevin. No, who was it? Monkey Island. It was Rich's son.
It was Randy, Ryan, and Rich.
Randy, Ryan, and Rich. Yeah, Randy Tudor, Ryan Dance, and Richard's son. Yeah, and I love those guys. That's one thing I'd say. I love that team. The Escape from Monkey Island team. I was happy as a clam running that project and being on that team. And those three engineers worked magic for us. And yeah, I did them as a three-headed monkey. But I did a lot of other things too for people on the team as well. But that's more me and compulsive. I'm still a doodler to this day. I still have sketches of people I've worked with. I'm gonna post them. I think I posted a bunch of them on Facebook, but I haven't posted all of them. Not all of them.
Still in 2000, you were given thanks in Star Wars Episode 1, Jedi Power Battles. What were you thanked for?
Probably animation review. Jedi Power Battles was the fighting game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was Kevin's project, if I recall. Kevin Boyle. Yeah. I may have given animation advice, and we had a group of us that were very ardent fighting game players in the studio, right? Tekken, Street Fighter, whatever have you, and the idea of like us making a fighting game using Star Wars got a lot of people jazzed, and so I may have given advice on that project. I probably did, yeah, given animation advice, as I was also a fighting game aficionado.
In 2002. You were the art director for the second canceled Full Throttle sequel, Full Throttle Hell on Wheels. What was your initial vision for the game's art direction, and how did you approach updating the classic Full Throttle style for a more modern audience and maybe modern platforms?
First off, they shouldn't have had me do that. I wasn't qualified. I felt overwhelmed from the very moment that we got into it. The technical limitations that we experienced on Monkey Island were trivial compared to the ones on Full Throttle. I was never, and how shall I put this? I wanted to capture the art style of the original game while upgrading it. In other words, every step forward should be a refinement of the previous one. I didn't want to disrespect the artwork from the original Full Throttle by changing it, like, okay, we're going to completely change the look and feel of all the characters and the atmosphere. I didn't want to do that because I felt that was disrespectful. And also, I'm not a big one for subverting expectations visually, but certainly expand on it and refine it. That being said, not being able to do pre-rendered backgrounds, for example, like everything is in an engine, everything. Dealing with texture memory, all right, for the backgrounds, for the ground and whatnot. I was happier with the characters, certainly, once we had the characters in there and the motion and the movement on them. And but again, inexperience. Our team had, I can't recall anyone on our team as far as animation that were experienced with working on console until later on in the project when other projects freed up and we got more experienced animators. And I clearly recall the animator saying, "You're nuts the way you set this up." You are crazy. And the one telling problem, which was that we were building the engine, while we're doing this. And it was kind of like a weird little RPG game with some puzzles in it. I don't know. I mean, like, it's like we were trying to build our own Tomb Raider from scratch with a small engineering team and also like managing expectations of what the company wanted versus what we were capable of doing. But yeah, not a happy time for me. I can honestly say I felt under a lot of pressure, and I didn't feel I was qualified for this in retrospect. And I know that was the challenge. When I was approached, and Karen approached me and just says, "We want you to be the art lead on this, and we know it's going to be a challenge for you." And I'm saying, "Why are you doing this to me?" Right? I'm ready to do the next generation of adventure game. Right? That's what psychologically what I'm ready for, and also what I was looking forward to. But you're doing console. So that was my plan initially, to emulate it and to emulate the art of the original Throttle and to refine it as much as possible. In some respects, it worked, but I was still not happy with the levels. And that's no offense to the level design team at all. It had more to do with texture memory and just the blockiness of it, and just like, and again, my expectations, I needed to lower them because I was thinking, why does this not look like a pre-rendered background? And it's like, don't be an idiot. It can't look like a pre-rendered background, right? If that's your expectation, then your artists are going to revolt, burn you in effigy or something. Like, that's not going to happen. All right. Again, the early 2000s, late 90s, with what I knew then and with what it may have been possible, but none of the engineers seemed to know how to do it. And the level designers, we'd look at a level of Ben riding down the road and they say, "Wow, it looks great." And I'm looking at it and said, "This doesn't look as good as Escape from Monkey Island." And it's like, so let it go. It's all about the movement. Imagine someone, with a little joystick moving stuff around and having, and then, but the point was moot. In the end, the game got canceled. We figured out how long and how much it would take to get it done once we actually had an engine that was semi-decent. And and they pulled the plug.
So they canceled the project the moment they got an accurate estimation of how long it will take to actually complete the game.
Yeah. Well, that's what I recall anyway. I could be wrong, though, because it was a long time ago. And to tell you the truth, I try to forget Full Throttle too. I mean, I'm taking the lessons from it, but up to that point, I was very happy with the work that I was doing. And, be careful what you wish for. Suddenly, while I was an art lead, and, but I'd always thought, you'd put me on adventure games. I wanted Graham's job, right? But that wouldn't have been good either. I mean, good Lord, Sam Max was 90% complete. The game looked great. I did cutscene animation for that game, and they still canceled it. I mean, I understand the reasons for it in retrospect, but I can tell you if you want. I mean, like what I was told as far as the cancellation.
Of Full Throttle or 7 Max?
7 Max. I'd known for a long time, and I'd spoken to marketing about this, like what's the deal with the adventure games? And they already knew. Sales and marketing can calculate how many units will sell before you do anything else, because it's always within the same range, almost exact. Adventure game fans are enthusiastic and loyal and magnificent, but their numbers don't grow. Like very little growth in terms of numbers, if any at all. So they could predict how much it costs. Then, on the other end, the organic costs of creating games just kept getting higher and higher and higher. The cost of marketing games gets higher and higher and higher. And logically, the only way to offset this is by increasing the price per unit of the games themselves. If you can't figure out a way to cut down the cost. And in the end, they just decided it wasn't worth it. It was better off putting those art and engineering resources into games that sell more. Like console at the time was like, considered to be like the best investment as far as that goes, as opposed to putting out a PC. I mean, when I at first thought, wow, we're doing a Full Throttle 2 adventure game. That's pretty exciting. Nope. Action adventure was the term. That's right. It was action adventure game was the term. At one point, we actually had the opportunity to use the Slayer engine because that was being marketed, being shopped around. And but the decision was left to the engineering team, and they said no.
Why didn't you use the Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine engine?
I do not know. You have to ask the engineers about that. But
were you relieved that they canceled the game?
No, I was bummed. I was burnt. At that point, I was pretty burned out. But on the other hand, I was pretty burned out doing stuff that wasn't particularly fun to do. It was closer to project management than actual artwork. The art that I was doing on Escape from Monkey Island or any of the previous projects. It's interesting. You're taking me on a trip down memory lane. I remember this one. But yeah, Full Throttle. Yeah, I mean, we were somewhat relieved, but it wasn't like we didn't see it coming. At some point in that project, it was like we were kind of spinning our wheels here. And building an engine while making a game is very, very hard. It's pretty tough.
Well, it was done in Grim Fandango, but the question is, when you started the project, did you fear that you might not reach the completion of the project? Or when the project started, it seemed like they're actually eager to ship it?
At the start, I'm always optimistic. and I have to be in order to function. At the start, talking to David Worrell and all of the stuff that he was the lead engineer at the time. Everything we had planned was pretty exciting. I was sort of really looking forward to learning stuff. I mean, like things like, those leather jackets that the bikers are wearing, we can really, put a gloss on it so it shines in engine and whatever. And none of it happened. I mean, none of it, and don't worry. Talking to other people in the studio, saying like, don't worry too much about the first iteration looking kind of weak sauce, because it'll just get better. You'll have time to polish later on. And it's like, yeah, whatever, and polish later on. And seeing how Slayer looked, how Buffy the Slayer engine looked. I mean, like, no, it wasn't really my call, but in retrospect, it's a shame we didn't use that engine. It would have saved us a lot, just to save the time. Spend the money, lease the engine, but it might have saved us a lot of time. But yeah, who can say? Again, I'm not the authority on engines. And the people who were decided not to use it. For the Indiana Joneses using that engine, I couldn't tell you. My end was the art. But this time around, I had a lead animator and I had a lead level dwellers, level design, and I had a lead background artist as well. But even then, just the sheer size and scope of the game, it was like scoping this out was a lot harder. It was far more iterative and organic process than an adventure game was.
I recently found in Paul Rand Pierce's portfolio what appears to be the interface and menu design for the game. I never saw that before. What can you share about this? This is how this was the action menu, just like there's the verb menu in the first game.
Yeah, that was like I don't remember who designed this. But I remember that look. I remember the hand was for interaction. I think was the foot for fighting. I can't remember. But I remember the fly swatter and the ace, and the head with the life bar and whatnot.
So anyway, it's in Paul Rand Pierce's portfolio. So I guess he designed it.
I guess so. Yeah, he did it. Paul Pierce, right? I remember him now. Yeah, good guy. But it was like I did the bulk of the character designs, but I shouldn't. I should have really consulted with character animators with experience working on console before doing it, because I had a certain ambition. My ambition was to have varied body types. And got really complicated. Well, they only got an experience. It was Christina, I think. Christina Boyle came on and she was like, you might do better to have just one body type and one skeleton, and all the animations are shared with it. Because, memory limitations being what they are. Or whatever you do, never mind the body types, make sure all your skeletons are identical at the time. And which is like, oh, that would have been nice to know. And but this is what I'm talking about. Things trying to separate the artistic from the technical, and you can't. The artistic people need to know the technical end in order to do their job, and that's I wouldn't. Yeah, that was where we were heading. More and more.
Well, for the record, the characters looked great. When I saw the trailer, the thing I didn't like, and probably many other adventure game fans, was the fact that it was an action game and not an adventure game. And the second thing that was apparent is the thing that Roy Conrad, who voiced Ben in the first game, passed away between the first game and the production of the second game. So not having the voice of Ben and having it be an action game instead of an adventure game, that's what eventually brought on the cancellation of the entire project, in my opinion.
The action game aspect that they wanted to be, the impression I got from management is we want to leverage our IP, LucasArts IP, not Lucas IP as in Star Wars and Indiana Jones. But we're not confident that you should leverage it as an adventure game because of the reasons I'd given before. Like, hey, like this is our margin for profit unless we double the cost of our games, individual units, or increase the cost of the individual units, as it was explained to me again. And so that seemed to be but then, yeah, you're right. It's sort of like, hey, I played an adventure game, right? And that is how I know Ben. And now, this is not what I would have signed up for. Now you got an action game instead. And so I understand that in terms of audience expectations. For the passing away of his voice actor, that is beyond our control, right?
I know.
And people getting annoyed at that really need to,
No, people weren't getting annoyed at that.
They were disappointed.
The thing is that, it was just one more thing. The main problem was the action aspect. And again, I understand that Full Throttle, out of all of the LucasArts IPs, is very in line with being an action game. It's not like you're going to take Day of the Tentacle and make it into an action game.
No.
But still, we played the first one and it was an adventure game. So we want the second one an adventure game as well. I think
Dig would have been a better action game, in my opinion, actually, though.
The Dig where you dig all the time.
Yeah, but like, listen, just in terms of level design, and it would be relatively easy to introduce some dangerous alien, adversaries, but neither here nor there. It wasn't good. It didn't work. Didn't work out overall.
Well, the first iterations of the Dig had survival elements where you had to eat or you die. So, I don't know. An action game in which you have to dig your way through the planet.
Mm-hmm.
The end.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it would make more sense to make it Full Throttle. I would think that I'm just saying that, for a space adventure, I could very easily, modify the Dig to make it an action adventure. Plus, Aliens was still fresh in everyone's mind as well. But yeah, we spent hours working on that Full Throttle combat system. The punch kick block combat system, and what, I don't know, actually, I don't know if there was block, but so much time working on that. And I don't know, in the end, it was still like, it still needs more work. It wasn't quite satisfying.
So in my conversation with Melina Annabelle, I showed her a clip from E3 in which she showcased the game. So was there a playable demo? You actually played the game? Was it fun?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I remember, yes, there was a playable demo, which was involved with Ben and the red-haired guy, the rockabilly dude. I remember fighting him. That was a long time ago. Again, like I said, I do recall that part. But yeah, I do remember that. But it's pretty vague. Like I said, I'm sorry.
No problem. So after this game, you worked as a storyboard artist, and you also worked on interactive art for Star Wars Jedi Starfighter.
Yeah.
What can you share about this project?
That was the project where the main character was Adagalia, who was one of the Jedi and sitting in the council from the first film, from episode 1. God, so many things. strange things happen. I mean, the original idea was for the story, the main villain to be using a certain type of weapon, and then we had to change it because of political and current events that made it unsavory or unwise to use it, to use that type of weapon. It was a gas weapon, I think, originally. Or no, it was something else originally, and then we changed it to a gas weapon. I don't remember. I just remember having to revise the storyboards for that a few times. The storyboards with the action sequences, like her jumping around in the Starfighter, were more fun. And jumping out of the Starfighter were a lot more fun to do. And I think I was doing those for Darren. I think Darren Stinnett was the project leader on that, was the director on that, if I recall.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. It was all right. It was a good break after pretty much burning out on Throttle. And to be able to do that. I was just waiting for word for the next gig I would be an art lead on, so it was just passing time, so to speak.
And then there was a huge gap between this game and the next game you're credited on, which is Mercenaries Playground of Destruction, which was released after you left LucasArts. So in those 3 years between Jedi, Starfighter, and Mercenaries, did you work on all the projects you listed before, Gladius 2, and the other games that were canceled?
Gladius 2, I remember working on. I didn't realize it was 3 years. Gladius 2, I got tapped to be an art lead on that, but that got canceled fairly early. That was part of the whole response to the studio to non-main IP titles, like just losing faith in them. Partially, I mean, it was no longer an issue. I know that around 1999, 98, 99, there was a huge push for the Episode 1 games, right? And that's when the Death Star got constructed. Like the central portion of the floor of the studio when we moved to the new building was locked away, and you couldn't go in there without signing a second NDA because it was like super secret projects related to Episode 1. We used to make fun of them, we'll call it the Death Star and whatnot. And I know that I had to sign a second NDA because I wanted to see some of the technology that they were using for a game I was working on, that I was the art lead on. And they said, you can't go in there without signing the second NDA. I said, oh, very well, I will sign it. And this one just wasn't enough. I thought it was silly. Myself, but hey, whatever, it was a big deal back then. They really were concerned about any leaks from the prequels. But afterwards, what was in it? It was Hal Bartwood's game that really slammed.
RTX Red Rock.
That's the one that really, the sales on that were abysmal, like really, really bad. And that kind of made them super gun shy for any IP that wasn't tested. Or basically, it was a hard enough time trying to pitch a non-Star Wars, non-Indiana Jones game in the first place, and then that thing came along, and then suddenly they got a bit gun-shy about all of them. And for all that Gladius 1 shipped, the Gladius 2, I don't even remember what the reasons they gave for that. We just got canceled in pre-production.
Because Gladius 2, Gladius was released in October 2003, and you stuck around until late 2004. So
that was April 2004 was my termination. I think it was May 2004. I'm positive about that. It was spring.
So this brings me to my next question. When did you leave LucasArts, which is May 2004? And what was the last project you worked on there?
Mercenaries, I believe, was the last project. And then there was some worry about what would happen next. Yeah, Mercenaries.
At least you got credited on Mercenaries. You got credited as pre-rendered cutscene theme.
I didn't. It was using 3D Studio Max for starters, so that was a bit of a challenge. I don't like animating in forward kinematics, especially not. And we weren't using biped. I was still pretty burned out. The Throttle experience really took a lot out of me. And I'd gone on vacation to Thailand for 3 weeks. And while I was there is when the layoffs came. And when I got back to California, I found a bunch of messages. I wanted to go like underground, incognito, whatever. No cell phone. I don't even know if I owned a cell phone back then in 2004. But I found a whole bunch of messages waiting for me and word that I had been laid off. So that was, it was kind of telegraphed. I believe one of the people in the art department had left accidentally a copy of the layoff list on a photocopier. And so everyone had a heads up on what was going on. And my name apparently was on the list. So I went in on the Saturday, downloaded all of my files that I needed because my key card still worked. I came back from Thailand Friday, went to work on Saturday, and then Monday I went into work. And then other people that had been laid off, this was the first round, were already gone. And then they had a company meeting introducing the new president of the company. And then right after the meeting, I got called out to HR. And so I wasn't surprised, but I was still shocked. I'd been at the company for 9 years at that point. But then I figured I needed a break from this anyway. So I didn't end up at EA until a year later.
And so you joined EA as a senior artist and outsource manager.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like at EA?
I discovered that, yes, company culture is different from company to company. And even more than that, project culture is different within. And it was a very different experience. EA is this giant company with multiple projects and multiple sub-companies underneath it. And each one of them has a different culture. I was very lucky to get into Pogo, which was a casual game culture, no death marching. Steady work. We ran very lean. That was the only issue I had with it. By lean, I mean like Andrew Peterson, who was the head there at the time of Pogo. He detested laying people off. It really hurt him. So he only hired as many people as he thought we needed. But the problem with that is it reduced levels of redundancy. So it was really tricky to find the time to take a vacation, right? Because I need someone to cover for me while I'm out. But Andrew was, he had a heart, I should say. And I know that it literally hurt him inside when people got laid off. And so there was that. Completely different. I mean, the EA campus itself was just such a nice place to work. 2 cafeterias. They had a freaking Starbucks in one building. They had a full gym with an in basketball court, tennis courts, just larger structure. They're very upfront about it too. I mean, in terms of what the expectations are. The saying we had at EA, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to get laid off, right? And as long as you're making money, you're safe. If you're not safe. Sometimes, if the company overall isn't making money, they have to do layoffs. And I would say that when I was at LucasArts, EA had a bad reputation amongst people at LucasArts. But working there, and I stayed there for 10 years, I can honestly say, maybe it's just the nature of the projects I was on and the people I worked with. I had a good experience working at EA. And EA is still around. LucasArts is not. That's all. And but again, my experience was working with Pogo and then working in mobile. I can't speak to the other studios. And where I have heard personally, like really bad experiences from people and like actual death marches that occurred back then.
And you were there at EA for a decade.
Yeah. I don't know how I did it. We used to joke about it. And I was like, Chris, are you laid off yet? And he said, nope, I'm still here. and perks, like stock options and whatnot, but they only vest if you're there for 7 years. This is 6 or 7 years. And so we joke, oh, you're never going to get vested. And I was, I don't know. I mean, like part of it was, again, the nature of the work that I was doing there. The timing was good for casual games. The timing was good for mobile games as well.
And then you moved on, to Bandai Namco as a senior artist. What can you share about your time there?
Bandai was, I had a very amicable parting when I left EA. They told me that my position was going to be removed, but they wanted me to stick around and do concept art for the Minions game that they were releasing for at least another 2 months. But it was okay if I found another job before then. I did with one of the, one of the people I'd worked with before, Jefferson Valderas, and they wanted me to come over and be outsourcing manager at Bandai Namco. And so I went over there. Initially, the building we were in was a very smelly old building in San Jose, but they told us, like we're moving to a bigger facility because it was like, relatively crowded, but not insurmountable. Then we moved to a really nice building. Also, where was it? I can't remember. It was north of San Jose, but it was a much nicer building. It was an open studio that took a bit to get used to as well. Although EA was already moving in that direction. The days of cubicles were gone. They were moving towards these open concept studios. That way, that gave more room for the codes to go around when someone got one. And no, not a fan of them myself. But hey, it is what it is. And working for a Japanese corporation, I was very much looking forward to that. Again, I always try to be positive because this is going to be an interesting experience. And it was. It was very interesting working, or a Japanese-American company, I should say. They weren't fully Japanese because most of the employees were Americans. But there's certain elements of their culture that they're interesting. Also, I'm a fan of Japanese animation and manga, and so it would be kind of cool to see how they operate as far as that. So it was very informative. Things like, the company doesn't own the IP. The manga artist owns the IP. Owns the intellectual property. So trying to make a game using their intellectual property is actually a pretty complex process, right? Actually a very complicated process because you need their permission, and that usually means you got to go through a bunch of middlemen just to get there. So that was interesting. Their aversion to modern digital tracking, like they were really big on everything on paper, and there are a few things. Their art Bibles, the level of detail that they have in their art Bibles when we were using characters from one of their from software characters in our collectible card game, Dark Souls characters, and the details that they submit in terms of the way the characters should look. It's like, wow. And working with their artists, we'd use their characters and then we'd say, okay, what was that game? Not Sword Art Online. But basically sending the art to Japan for their approval so we could use it in our game and the things that mattered to them. It was interesting and educational, I should say. our game that we made didn't make any money. That's really the reason that we were done. That's it. And they were pretty upfront about that too. Like, I don't mind if they're honest, in that respect, and if the perks are nice. And it's like, all right, okay, we didn't make any money. We know what's coming, and yep, we're laid off. And and if we don't have anything else to work on, then that's when the danger occurs. But it was fun. I would say, overall, it was fun. And some good people I met, and I still stay in touch with to this day that I worked with there. But very different working for a Japanese corporation. Very different, Japanese American, I should say. Again.
And in November 2018, you started working at Storm 8 as lead art outsourcing producer. What can you share about your time there?
By then, I was a full-on outsourcing producer. I wasn't doing art in any meaningful way anymore. That's just the way it progressed, so to speak. Part of it was job security. I have to confess, insofar as I'd watched superb, excellent, really skilled production artists, especially at EA, get laid off. And just cause, right? And nothing related to performance. Like, good people get laid off. And it struck me how fragile production art could be. Now, they ended up landing on their feet and moving on to other companies. But more and more, I found myself, initially, I was hired to do, to manage multiple projects. Like, casual games aren't like CD-ROM games, which is like 1-2 year cycles. Casual games, 4 months, 4 to 5 months. So I'd be working on 3 games at a time, 1 in pre-production, 1 in production, 1 in post. And then when the post shipped, bam, then everything would move down. And then I get 1 in pre-production, 1 in production, 1 in post, and they'd move along faster. It's not possible for me to do all the art for those games. And we didn't have enough artists on staff to do the art for those games. So I had to work with outsourcing. I'd hire artists or other studios outside of EA to get the games done. And I got more and more used to that cycle of working, and I found I enjoyed it. And then again, in the way back when I worked as a producer on that summer project, right? It's like, this is not something that I'm averse to, but it's not animation. Honestly, I was kind of turned off of the 3D animation as well because A, it wrecked my hands, and B, which I recovered from eventually. But I don't know. It's in terms of career paths, I've always been somewhat of a generalist, and in some respects, I like doing different things. Was one of the reasons why I chose Funbag Animation Studio instead of going to Funbag Studio, instead of going to a strict animation studio. So I want a place where I can do different things because I get bored, right? And outsourcing is always interesting. I think that was the most fun because at Pogo, and most fun was at Pogo because I'd be 3 different games, completely different games, card game, match 3, or, racing game, 3 at a time. And the art demands on each of them was different. But going to Storm 8, there's only 1 game, right? And the years that I was there, it was basically 1 game that we were working on, and it was a mobile game, and it was profitable, and we made another game, a second game that was basically a duplicate and rebranding of the first one, right? And it was just doing outsourcing for the art for that game, and an interesting experience, I would say. But it was what it was. They very nice people. Again, I know I'm saying that a lot, but it's very important. If you if you work at a place where there's people that that you're working with that you do not like, that are very irritating, then that's just not worth it. At least there was a couple of guys at Funbag, for example, I would have preferred not to work with, but again, for the most part, and I've been very fortunate in terms of the places that I've worked. But again, it's I've gotten my jobs through contacts as opposed to cold calls.
And so you were at Storm 8 throughout the pandemic up until very recently, in August 2024.
We got hit by the pandemic and sent home. We worked from home for the duration of the pandemic, and then suddenly a survey went out asking, hey, do you want to go back to the studio or do you want to stay home forever? And most of us responded, you mean, yeah, sure, we'll stay home forever. So no traffic, no commute, but a certain degree of responsibility and a whole level of etiquette required for working remotely. If anyone who's worked remotely probably understands this, like there's a whole protocol around it. Ideally, an understanding that, all right, don't micromanage people. You shouldn't do it in the workplace, and you shouldn't do it remotely either. But a weekly stand-up is a good idea, one weekly meeting, or whatever, at least, to keep everyone on the same page. And the expectation of core hours, where, hey, if I'm looking for your ass between this hour and that hour, then you have 5 to 10 minutes to respond, in case you're in the bathroom or grabbing a snack or something. If you're going to be away from the keyboard, let everyone know, and let them know how long you're going to be away from the keyboard. Pretend that we're in the same office, right? And but then there are different etiquettes also for, slightly off topic, open office, for example. You're not everyone in different rooms, or even in cubicles. I'm sitting here and my coworkers are here and here. Your barriers become headphones, and I know the etiquettes were better at Bandai because we understood certain things. If someone's in the middle of a task, don't interrupt their train of thought by tapping them on the shoulder and say, hey, by the way, no, don't do that. Send them a message and say, hey, I need to talk to you about something. But you don't want to interrupt them while they're working on something. That can be a bit disruptive. I liked that etiquette myself. I liked that stuff. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing much to say. It was regarding Storm 8. One was spending a lot of time learning about interior design and exterior design, familiarizing myself with that. Working with some really good studios overseas. And overall, they're a pretty generous and very understanding company for the most part, as companies go.
And so you left in August 2024, a few months ago. What have you been doing since?
I'm retired. I took a look at the games industry and I said, I'll look for 6 months, and if I haven't found anything by then, I'm going to go into semi-retirement. Officially retired in 2 years. I'm spending my time doing life drawing and basically upgrading my drawing skills that I let sit for a long time, and I do freelance jobs. I recently did a freelance job, which was concept art. And I can't disclose any of it, but that was fun to do. But yeah, I found when I really took a close look at the situation and went to a financial advisor, I guess my time at EA really paid off. And it's like, yeah, you could, go into semi-retirement, and it's like, all right, then, let's do it. I need a break anyway. And, well, not so much I need a break. It's just kind of like, all right, I've been at this for a long time. The games industry has changed a lot in 30 years. And even my conversation with you, Daniel, thinking about it is, what was I doing the first year? And it was way more fun than what I'm doing now. I remember back when I was animating, and there was like 2D animation was really, what got me into it. And but you have to be flexible. And again, little old me saying like, I want to try different things, and I have, and I'm happy with that. But I'd rather do what I want now instead of what other people want. And so I take freelance work if I like it, not because I have to. That's different.
Now, before we conclude our conversation, one final question from me. What are your plans for the coming year, and how can people stay in touch with you and your work?
My plans for the coming year are to continue to work on life drawing, painting, illustration, maybe do a bit of animation. I still have my old disc when I get around to it. I can be contacted on LinkedIn and Facebook, and also what do you call that? Hang on. I have LinkedIn, Facebook. Although really, I don't pay attention to LinkedIn anymore, partially because I hardly pay attention to LinkedIn that much. Instagram. I have an Instagram account. Just look for Chris Miles or Christopher Miles on Instagram. I post my life drawing there. That's where I'm at. If people are wondering what I'm up to.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining me for a conversation today. You really proved that you are the best Chris Miles of the bunch.
It was interesting. I think at one point when I was at EA, there were 3 of us, and we kept getting each other's emails, and really said that, wow, the world's a really small place. It's been a pleasure, Daniel.